Welcome to the official GRMNT channel. In this series, we are recreating this unreleased Mugler blazer and bringing it into the real world through one of the oldest fashion design processes, draping. It's what most people imagine a fashion designer does all day, grabbing fabric and placing it onto a mannequin. But here's the catch. We'll use only the tools available in CLO3D. No mannequin, no fabric, it's all done digitally. After designing the initial corset components, we'll learn how to alter them, how to create volume from the waist up, how to achieve these incredible geometric shoulders, and last but not least, how to add these side skirts, which really make the piece stand out. If you've never given fashion design a shot, do not worry. This video is literally for you. After we finish developing the silhouette, we're off to the atelier to actually make the garment. We'll use the same files we design in CLO3D to bring the piece to life in the real world. We'll learn how to cut the pattern pieces, how to use the sewing machine for the first time, and how to properly finish the blazer in a way that we'd feel comfortable sending out to a client. But the journey doesn't end there, because the real magic happens after that, when we'll use those CLO3D files to now present our work digitally, by creating this scene from one of the most iconic fashion shows ever. Mastering either of those techniques will set you up for success in a fashion design career. You don't have to apply all of the steps in your brand, but it definitely won't hurt knowing how they are achieved, or even that they exist as an option. With that out of the way, let's get started on our first chapter, the design stage. Here is the piece that we're trying to recreate. Starting from this point and going down, you can probably notice that this is a very tightly fitting piece. And the best method to achieve this kind of result traditionally is to actually do it through draping. So you'd have to cut out a few rectangles, you want to place them onto a physical bodice, which I assume most of you don't own. And then you want to mark your seam allowances, connect your pieces, test out the prototype, see how well it fits, and do adjustments from that point onwards. As you can imagine, this is a lot of work and quite a big investment. If you don't own the equipment, then you have to buy the equipment. But if you only care about design, then doing it in CLO3D seems like the most natural way possible. So in the library on the upper left corner, I'm gonna select the avatar tab, double click, female V2, double click, and I usually go with Grace. So I'm gonna choose Grace again. There's no difference between those avatars. It's only, I don't know, I guess the racial profile, maybe the head shape is slightly different, but whichever one you're gonna choose, it doesn't make a difference. Unless you're worried about sizing, in which case the difference is huge. So once you have selected one of the avatars and it shows up in here, you can go into the size folder and then you're gonna see that you have all of those different profiles. The main issue with women's bodies is that they're incredibly varied, much more varied than the men. Men only form a belly, they're short, they're tall, whatever. It's quite simple and straightforward to actually dress them because there are no curves, so therefore there's not that much complexity. But for women, in case you want to do one of those different standards, right? So say you want to do a petite curvy size 8 or size 10 or size 12, whatever it might be, you can actually do it with this technique. And we can go even more in depth with it. We can head over to the avatar tab, avatar editor, and you can actually input your custom measurements here. So if you are a lady and you want to create this piece for yourself or maybe for a close friend of yours, then of course go in, take the measurements, input them in here, but do make sure that when you are taking your measurements, you add just a tiny bit extra to allow enough room for breathing. So when you're intaking air, the belly goes out, right? The lungs, they go out slightly. Maybe take the measurements as the person is inhaling air. That makes a huge difference. And they're not tucking in their belly because that's not fair. Once you make the piece of clothing, it's not gonna fit properly. Okay, I'm just gonna head back by clicking on those two dots at the top, and I'm gonna select Grace again. It shows up this open avatar tab, open, press OK, and that's simply gonna replace her, take me back to the beginning. And in case you're new to CLO3D, which I suspect many of you are, then let's talk about navigation before we actually start designing anything. The best way to navigate inside a CLO, you're gonna need the mouse because of the middle button, the scroll wheel. With the right click on the mouse, you can rotate in the 3D window by pressing down the scroll wheel. So you want to push it down, you want to press the button, not rotate it up or down. You can do this motion, which is called panning. You can pan up, pan down. And then if you want to zoom in and out, then you can do it through your scroll wheel by rotating it. Rotate down to zoom in, rotate up to zoom out. What about the 2D window, which is where we're going to be altering our pattern pieces? Well, same principle. Rotate the scroll wheel, zoom in and out, and then pan by pressing the button down, holding it pressed down, and then just moving around. If you've watched any of my past tutorials, you're gonna know that I actually like to start constructing from a rectangle. But this time, I want to show you again a method that perfectly replicates what the traditional method is. So how exactly are we gonna do this? I'm gonna hold down the left click here, and you're looking for the 3D pen avatar. Check this out. So if I start drawing on my avatar, if I switch over to the flatten tool, I can now hover over. It has a very weird bug. I don't know why this is happening, but once it's blue, you want to click, left click on it, and then you want to press enter on your keyboard. And check what happened here. It somehow translated the 3D shape into a 2D pattern piece. It's almost as if you brought the pattern piece, you placed it on top, found the shape that you want, drew it, and then, yeah, it just shows up. This is so much quicker and so much more precise, and it's not gonna give you as much of a headache. But this is not the pattern piece that I'm after, is it? I'm gonna select it again, backspace in order to delete. And now what I actually want to do is to minimize the 2D window, because I'm not gonna need it for a while. In order to do that, I'm gonna press on the 3D window here. This is the one that we were previously on, so it has a split view. This one is only the 3D window, this one is only the 2D window. I'm gonna select the 3D window in my situation here, and I want to minimize CLO3D. I'm gonna start dragging it from the right side, and now open up the reference, snap it to the right side. If you have a Mac, I don't think this is possible still. And now we can actually start drawing our shapes. And as you can imagine, this area here, we can't really do, the sleeve we can't really do, but here's how it actually works. I'm gonna head over here to the edit 3D pen avatar, Control A in order to select all of the components and delete them with backspace, because we're not gonna be needing that. I'm gonna hold down my left click here, select the 3D pen avatar, and in order to go from the perfect front view, you want to press 2 on your keyboard, not on the numpad. You want to do it on the regular keyboard. And then I'm zooming in, and I want to start drawing my first shape. Just to make sure that I'm right down the middle, I'm gonna try to align it with the middle of the bra or the belly button. I'm gonna click maybe here. Then I want to hold down shift, so I'm creating the next point perfectly vertical. You know, once I sway to the right, it goes to the right, or like this. You can only do it horizontally or vertically. Then I'm gonna click again, keep going, and I want to take it all the way here to the base. I'm gonna hold down shift still, and what I'm actually looking to draw here is this shape. So I want it to start here, go out, and then I'm gonna take it to where the nipple is. All right, that's the most prominent shape on the body. So I'm gonna click here. Okay, it's giving me a weird bug. No problem, just click. The thing is, this shape is not gonna be perfect. We can go in and edit it. Do not worry about it too much at this stage. Let's just try and draw it onto the body, and then we're gonna make some decisions after the fact. I'm gonna give it like some sort of strap. The strap goes back in, and now it opens to the neckline. And this is gonna be one of the main components that we have drawn here. Let's now do the next line. I'm gonna do this one here. So it goes out to the shoulder, and then it connects towards the sleeve. Press 2 on the keyboard, and I want it to start from that same point. Maybe do it from here this time. I want it to go out, and from this point it actually goes up. Let's go to this area and take it all the way to the armpit, and now just go up with it. I'm gonna take it towards the tip of the shoulder here, maybe something like this. You might want to add a bit more detail, so insert just
a bit more points if you can't get that line straight. That seems to work. Awesome. Now I'm gonna do a piece which literally wraps around the arm, goes down, and stops to around the same point as I have it here. So I'm gonna start from the base actually. Hold down Shift to take it horizontally. Click to around this point, and then I'm gonna take it up, but I'm gonna open it up just a tiny bit more. So not going perfectly vertical. Click a few more times, click, and connect it here. Perfection. Now let's do the back line. And the problem with the reference is I couldn't find the picture from behind. This is like a custom one-off piece. I actually don't know what it looks like from the back angle, but I'm gonna use my intuition and maybe create a segment starting from here and going down, right? It would make sense to replicate what's happening in the front to what's happening in the back. So maybe start from here, go up, go in, and from this point I'm gonna take my line down. So same as we did with the front. Now I'm holding down Shift. And for this one, I'm gonna go just a tiny bit lower because we do want to connect it here next to the crotch. So I'm gonna click here and take it in. You want to make sure that your pieces actually have a start and end point. So now onto the last piece that I'm gonna create for the back. I'm not gonna connect it here. You're gonna see why it wouldn't work. It's not gonna flatten. You're only gonna have issues. I want to take it as close as possible, okay, without actually connecting, because those pieces on this side are already connected. If I start connecting them to another piece, the software is not gonna know to separate those connections. If you try to do it ahead of the tutorial, then yeah, you're gonna feel like, oh my god, why was I such a dumbass and why did I hurry? I'm gonna hold down Shift now. Head towards the crotch, go from here, I can probably connect it there. And now the very last connection point, I'm gonna start it from here, take it up there. And just to check, you wanna make sure that you hold down the left click, open up flatten, and you wanna make sure that all of those components are actually highlightable in blue. Because if you messed up something, it's not gonna work. You're not gonna see this blue highlight no matter where you hold your mouse. That's how you know you kind of screwed up. So yeah, you might have to actually start over. Now let's select the editing tool and let's actually start dragging those points around, because even if we lock them in place at this stage, it doesn't mean that it's permanent. So I might have to select this point and actually bring it to where the nipple is. I want to straighten this line here. This one, I also want to straighten it. Maybe something like this. This one looks super weird at this stage, but it's not a problem. It's gonna show up quite weird in the pattern itself, but we can modify it in the 2D window after the fact. And actually knowing how to correct those pattern pieces is super important. I'm gonna bring those points closer to one another, but again, they're gonna have a tendency to touch. Make sure they're not touching, because I've only experienced issues with that. Get it close, it wants to touch, let it not touch. Just leave a small millimeter gap in between. So I'm gonna move this one here. Perfect. This one, I'm gonna want it to have that prettier of a curve. So you can imagine this line, once we start curving it, is just gonna look better. But if you want to actually introduce a point in between, you can add a curve point, right? So now we can actually start curving if that's what you're after. Or we can even select this point, right? I can delete that point and I'm gonna right click, add curve point, do this. But what I actually like to do is to keep all of them segment points and then I just curve them in the 2D window after the fact. Cool, I think that's gonna work. This point I might have to lower. I think this is what it looks like at the back, but again, I'm not sure. Maybe something like this. You can actually imagine the corset if it was a corset. We're doing a blazer, but the principle is exactly the same. You can actually see it starting to take shape. So now I'm gonna minimize the reference. I'm gonna maximize the window here, go into my split view, press to go from the front view, and then I want to select the flatten tool. I'm gonna click. Once they turn blue, You see it has a weird bug. Maybe your version doesn't, mine has, but I don't use this function enough to actually justify upgrading my software. I'm gonna press enter on the keyboard with all the selections made. You want to make sure that your cursor is hovering over the 3D window, press enter, and voila. You're gonna see all of those components magically pop up. If you care about making super tight fitting clothing and having it work even from the prototype stage, this must feel super exciting for you. I'm gonna press Q in the 3D window to switch over from the edit curve point avatar tool, right? I want to go to this one, which is my move tool, Control Z, and that's also gonna select A in my 2D window, which allows me to now select the pattern piece. And what I want to do is to actually arrange them, because this doesn't make any sense when you're looking at it. What is this chaos? Well, if you find yourself lost, which may be the case since you are a beginner, you can do this trick. You can go to the 3D window, click on a corner that you're trying to actually figure out, hey, where is this located? And it's gonna show up in the 2D window. This blue dot, right? You can see it. If I click there, click lower, check it, it shows up. If I do it the opposite way, so if I click in the 2D window, it does not show up in the 3D window, which is a shame. If I were to design the software, I would definitely change that. So with the piece now selected, you can see that we have now some options for scale, which you definitely want to stay far away from at this stage. This is gonna completely shift the shape and screw up your work. But this one here is for rotation. So I can even hold down shift to get it at the 90-degree angle. This is gonna be my centerpiece at the front. Then let's try and locate the next piece. This one here. You can see it pop up. And as you can see, this point connects here. So we can kind of get it in place. Those two pieces we're gonna actually merge together up next, but let's leave it like this for now. Then I want to locate this piece at the armpit, the side panel. I'm gonna move it in its final position. Now let's try and locate this one. You can see it here. Rotate it. Perfect. Get it here. And now select the very last one. And you can probably tell this one needs to be rotated this way. Look how perfectly those components are gonna match. They're gonna fit together. It's gonna be beautiful. I now want to create a selection box, right? So with A selected, you can draw this kind of a box, select all the components at the same time, and then we can just move them towards the right side of my avatar, since we have dressed up the right side of the body. And now, do you think that we should be drawing all of those components again onto the body? Do you think that would be like an efficient way of working? Because I'm telling you, if you want to do that, you're going to give up on fashion design very quickly, just as quickly as you started. No, of course, we're going to symmetrize them. So the right panel for the front is going to be the same as the left panel for the front. How do we do that? With A selected, I'm going to now make the selection box, and on my keyboard, I'm going to press Control D. Or I can right click. It's doing exactly the same thing, but I want you to understand what it stands for. It's clone pattern with linked editing, symmetric pattern with sewing, which is the most mouthful definition of anything in the world. Or you can just do Control D, because we're going to be using this all the time when designing in CLO3D. So just remember, you want to make something symmetrical, you want to do it on the opposite side. So if you design a sleeve, what do you press to bring it over to the opposite side instantly? Control D. That's correct. And now the next step is to actually simulate and see this perfect garment actually wrap beautifully around the body, because at the moment it has those weird looking artifacts, right? On the keyboard, you want to press space. Check what happens. Oh, that didn't work. Why did it not work? Well, because of gravity. Gravity is our best friend inside of CLO3D. It's why this software exists, and gravity has a tendency to pull things down. Why did they fall towards the ground? Well, because they weren't actually sewn together. Some of the components were, so if I press B on my keyboard, I'm gonna notice this green line here. Those two components were connected. Select here, those were connected. Those were connected. These were connected. Okay, that's super interesting, but why were they not connected, for instance, at the shoulder, right? It should maybe hang up on the shoulder, but we never connected them. Remember? We left the 1 millimeter gap in between the panels just so we don't get a bug. Yeah, that makes sense. So what you can do in order to connect them is to press space again, right? I want to stop the simulation. You can also find the option here on the top left. And on the keyboard, you're gonna press Ctrl Z, Ctrl Z, Ctrl Z. When I made those selections, these count as steps. So I'm just gonna keep going. Oh, and I want to stop here, because if I keep going even further, this half is gonna disappear. That was a step in our design process. And now all that we have to do is to actually sew those components together, so next time when we simulate, they actually stick to the body. How are we gonna do that? Well, I want to teach you the most versatile way of connecting things inside of CLO3D by pressing M on your keyboard, which brings up this option of free sewing. So this one allows you to select the segments that you want to connect. And if you are on your phone scrolling on Instagram, this is the time to stop. You actually want to pay attention to this because this is super, super important. You want to click on one of those points, okay? And this is where your sewing line is going to start. And then you need to tell it where you want your sewing line to end. So I'm gonna move my mouse, slide it over. Once it snaps to this point, click, and I'm done, right? Wrong. You're not done because you haven't told it what you want to connect your segment to. So we want to sew it from here to here. So we actually require 4 operations to do a single sewing line. We know that we started here at the neckline, and now if I go into the 3D window and hover my mouse over, it's currently not perfect because it's not simulated, but you can kind of tell that it should be probably starting from here, taking it in. Click. And I stopped right at that blue dot. I don't know if you noticed. Let me do it again. So I'm gonna start from here, take it to here, okay? And then I want to start here, and I'm not gonna take it to that segment. I'm gonna take it to the blue dot, which tells me that the sewing line perfectly matches in length. And then I'm gonna click. And now, if I try to simulate, I'm pressing 2 on my keyboard, pressing Q, and then pressing space. Check this out. You've already sewn your first piece. It looks perfect, right? It's fully connected. It's absolutely gorgeous. Of course it's not. We still have to connect the rest of the segment, which would equate from here to here. And how do we do that? Well, we follow exactly the same procedure. So by pressing M, clicking here, going down towards the shoulder line, you can even see it here in the 3D window popping up. And then I want to do it right from where I ended my first sewing line, taking it down, and you're probably gonna notice that, those segments, they're not matching. Ideally, you want to take it all the way, right? That makes sense. Start from the neckline, take it all the way to the shoulder. And the problem is with our design, because when we drew those lines, maybe we missed a few millimeters here and there, and they add up. But of course, we're gonna address this later. Let's for now try and see what this actually looks like. So now I'm gonna simulate again. And if I go into the 3D window, if I left click as the simulation is running, so you wanna make sure that this arrow is actually blue, I can even pinch and drag the garment around. Almost like reality, isn't it? And what about the rest of the sewing lines? Well, I think it's quite obvious. We need to do the front and we also need to do the back. But this time, let's try and sew it directly into the 3D window. Is this a method that I recommend you use? Definitely not. I find it that the best way to sew anything inside a CLO is actually to do it here in the 2D window. But just to understand that it can be done, I'm gonna do it here. I'm gonna press M on my keyboard and I'm gonna connect it. So from here, take it all the way down. When you're doing it in the 3D window, it's slightly different because on your ending line, you want to double click as opposed to a single click. And then I'm gonna connect it. So I'm taking it here from the base and going all the way up, right? Double click in order to complete the sewing line. And there we have it, they're connected. So I'm gonna go over to the left corner and I can simulate, or just press spacebar on your keyboard. Oh. It does look quite interesting, I'm gonna give it that, but I feel like maybe this is not the way that you actually want to sew those components together. So something definitely went wrong. What exactly was it? Maybe you caught it, maybe you've already used CLO3D, this is not your first gig and you know why this is happening, or maybe this feels like a thriller mystery movie to you and now you definitely need to know what happened. We can, just like every other software, press Ctrl Z in order to go back one step. What do you think happened here? If this is your first project, well, you've actually sewn the top of the left side of the body to the base of the right side of the body. Which doesn't make any sense. If you did this at the atelier, I would have to pretty much congratulate you for pulling off the impossible. But in CLO3D, doing such mistakes is actually super easy. If you're not paying attention at where you start your sewing line and where you end it, then this can actually happen. Now, how do we fix it? I'm gonna press B on my keyboard and I can select the sewing line, either here in the 3D window by clicking on it. So here I'm selecting a different one. Maybe it's not so visible, but when you make the selection, it should highlight it slightly. Or you can go here in the 2D window. I think it's actually quite visible here. And you're gonna notice that you have an X, right? And in the 3D window, those lines should be parallel to one another, but here they're forming some sort of web. What if we right click and go for reverse sewing? Does that look a bit more correct to you? What do you think is gonna happen when we simulate here? Let's try it. I'm gonna press space. And you're gonna notice now that this time we actually nailed it. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z and Ctrl Z again to go back to our mistake. And let's try and actually understand how this works inside of CLO. So when we did our sewing line, we started at the top, went towards the base. Is CLO indicating the fact that we did this in any way? Yeah, it is. Through this very, very small, innocuous notch. You may overlook it if you're not paying super close attention, but now you actually need to focus on it. So if I go onto a sewing line, which is actually correct, you're gonna notice the same notch here and the notch here, and they're aligning. And the fact that the notch is higher onto the segment, so it's not right down the middle, it's like a quarter of the way up, right? Here, it's on a quarter of the way up, but on the opposite segment, it's a quarter of the way down. So we started from the base, went towards the top. So again, if you make a mistake, you can either delete it by pressing backspace, or I'm gonna Ctrl Z again. You can press B, select your sewing line and press Ctrl B. I highly encourage you that to learn those hotkeys, because doing it through right click, I don't know, you're gonna find that there are so many options, maybe you get lost. Just learn the crucial tools. And the hotkeys that are most important, I'm gonna keep repeating throughout the tutorial. So now that we got the sewing line right, I'm gonna press space in order to simulate. And let's quickly address the back. We want to connect those two. And how do we do that? On my keyboard, I'm gonna press M. This time, I actually want you to pay attention to where you have your sewing line starting. So I want to take it here from the top of the neck, at the top, right? Take it towards the base, go all the way, click. And then onto the opposite segment, so you can even see it getting highlighted here in the 3D window. Pay attention here as I'm doing this. You want it to start at the top, start heading down, head down, take it all the way, and click. Simulate by pressing space, and there you have it. Your first corset design, which if you ever try to do this in the real world, you're gonna know this is actually super difficult, but doing it in CLO, not too difficult. It's actually quite intuitive, I find it. And before we actually start working on the piece itself, let's start cleaning up those lines, because when you have a look at this, those are super jagged, they have corners, pointy corners, it doesn't make any sense. If you wanted to sew this in the real world, it would be a nightmare and the product would not look good. You would end up with a lot of issues caused by those pointy corners. In the real world, you want to have smooth lines that you are connecting to one another. So how do we do that? Well, let's do the most straightforward procedure, which is to press Z. We can select this segment point, hold down Shift, select this one, go all the way towards the base. There we have it. And now I'm gonna right click and select the option of convert to curve point. So as you can see now, the points, the black points actually went away. But in reality, they're not completely gone. They were just transformed into curve points. How do we access curve points? We do that by pressing V on our keyboard or by selecting this option here. So you can hold down the left click and go for edit curve point. And those points, I find them to be the most intuitive way to actually curve a segment. For instance, you had this straight segment and you wanted to add a bit of a curve. Press V on your keyboard, start curving it in. You can see just how naturally it can be done and effectively. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z to get rid of my curve point here. Press V, and now we actually want to delete as many of those curve points as we can without actually altering the final shape. So for instance, if I look at this kind of looks weird, right? We have so many of them. What if we selected all of these and we pressed backspace on our keyboard? That's gonna get rid of them and it's not gonna change the shape almost at all. Maybe it does it on a minute level, a millimeter here or there, but that's not gonna make too much of a difference. I'm gonna select this point here, delete it. This point seems pointless to me. There we go, simulate and perfection. Now that we cleaned up this line, let's clean up the rest of them. We can follow exactly the same procedure, but this time instead of selecting all the points manually, I'm just gonna do a selection box, try to catch as many of them as I can, then hold down shift, do another selection box. You can be a bit more chaotic with it and it's still gonna work. When you right click, do convert to curve. It slightly changed the feature, but not enough to actually cause an issue. But say you are a perfectionist, right? And now you notice that you have a slight gap here. Well, you can press in the 3D window, locate the position where the gap was introduced, press V and just curve it out. So we're adding the bit of fabric back to our design. And now when we simulate, we have exactly the same shape that we started from. Look at it. It goes out, it goes in, it goes out, it goes in. The body does not have as many points of detail as we ended up with the corset. So we can safely assume that, hey, maybe this line shouldn't go in, back in like this. We can delete those. We can delete those. Now I kind of straightened it. It went in a millimeter. Say you're not happy with it. We can of course Ctrl Z. Select this point. That one didn't change too much. Okay. Now we can select those three here. Get rid of them. The rest of them I'm gonna keep for now. I can maybe delete those here, delete this one here. It's slightly changing the shape, but not to a point where we're not gonna be able to actually achieve our design. And you're gonna notice that this garment is actually go through so many changes that this doesn't make a difference at all. I figured out that I kind of missed this point here, so I'm gonna right click, convert to curve point. I can delete this one. And I'm gonna delete almost all of them here at the base. It straightened up my line. And I can get rid of all of these. Why are those points here, right? This should be a perfectly straight segment, especially at this stage. Here we have some very weird details. We can probably delete all of them. Yeah, the shape stays exactly the same. And now let's convert those to curve points. So select them by doing a selection box, convert to curve point, V, and now let's start cleaning them up. This one, it has a very weird shape. So this is right here at the front, okay? You can kind of see it here. Why is it going in? It shouldn't be going in so much. Straighten this one out a bit. Maybe point this one out. There we go, simulate again. I think this actually works. At this stage, we're still gonna go in and you're gonna notice just how much we change it. Let's now address this area here. Right click, convert to curve point. And this one, we can get rid of those points here. Delete them. I'm gonna save it as such for now. Then press Z, select those points here. Right click, convert to curve point. We can, so many of them we can delete. Yeah, I'm gonna save it as such. Z, select, right click, convert to curve. Get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. So the cleaner you can get it without affecting the shape too much, the easier it's gonna be to actually edit everything later down the line, which we definitely have to do. We're not going for a tight fitting corset here. Okay, let's convert those. I'm gonna select all those points in the middle. Z, select, right click, V. This one actually seems consistent enough. This one, right click, convert. You can even delete this one. I want to move the component out of the way. You don't want to have them on top of one another. Select those, this, the neck opening, the shoulder, right click, convert to curve point. There we have it. This one I can probably delete, maybe not all of them. Let's get rid of those two, this one in the middle. These I reckon we're not gonna need. Okay, and those we definitely don't need. So now we have a much cleaner starting point. This point I missed. We can even get rid of all of them. This one seems like a bug to me. Yeah, there you have it. This one we can even delete. I'm gonna simulate. There we have it. Now the question is, how can you tell if the garment is too tight on the body? Because in theory, check this out. I'm selecting all the components, pressing A. I can scale them down by grabbing one of the corners. You don't want to grab it from here or from here. You want to make sure that you're grabbing the corners, so you're scaling it proportionally. And I'm gonna scale it down to, I don't know, let's say 90% of what it currently is. And you're gonna notice that, it doesn't change too much, right? But in the real world, if you did this, you would not be able to breathe inside of it. You wouldn't even be able to dress it unless you made it out of metal and it was some sort of torture device. It's not gonna work. This is why we have to actually look at something called a strain map, or you can press Alt+7. When we select the strain map, we're gonna notice that depending on the fabric that we have attached, at the moment we only have the default fabric, which we can see here in the object browser, but this default fabric has a bit of stretch to it. It's not super stiff, it's not like a raw denim kind of fabric, not a twill. It has a bit of stretch, and even it goes into the red, which is telling us that, dude, this item is actually ripping at the seams. The person would literally suffocate if they were to dress it. So now I'm gonna press Ctrl Z, do it multiple times so we go back to the original size. And now when I simulate, you're gonna notice that, we actually don't have an issue almost at all. We can kind of see a bit of redness here, a bit of redness here, but this is only happening because CLO3D has a bit of a buffer. So if I zoom in all the way, you're gonna notice that the garment is not actually sitting on the avatar. It has a small air gap. And that air gap is controlled by selecting the avatar, going here, and it's called the skin offset. Let's do it 0, which is the real world, right? The fabric would be sitting directly onto the body. And now when I simulate, you're gonna notice that the red is almost entirely gone, if not entirely gone, right? I can maybe lift it, help it up a bit. But you can see that the issue is becoming much less prevalent. So I'm gonna Ctrl Z because actually I do want to have a bit of a skin offset. I might even increase mine. I'm gonna do 5 millimeters so we don't end up with a garment that is way too tight around the body. I'm gonna simulate, and now you're gonna see that it's becoming more red than it was before, which is perfectly normal, but we're gonna address this later down the line. I just want you to know that the avatar is communicating to you. It is telling you, oh my god, dude, you're making that shit too tight. You just have to pay attention and look at the strain map. In the real world, when you dress a person, they're gonna tell you, I can't move, I can't breathe, I can't bend, I can't do shit in the piece that you've created for me. But in 3D space, nobody is communicating unless you, again, open up your ears. So you definitely want to use this option here. Now that the lines are clean and looking beautiful, why don't we actually start to address the design that we're after? And whenever I'm doing a piece, I always start at my main anchor point. Again, gravity dictates where your anchor points are. For tops, you want to do it at the shoulder, and for bottoms, you want to do it at the waistline. The reason being that the garment actually starts here and then it falls down. So there is a cascading effect starting at the top towards the base. If you do a modification here, it is going to affect the base. But if you do a modification here, it is not going to affect the top. That's my logic behind design. So let's start right at the top and address the elephant in the room. Why don't we compare the two side by side, and what can you immediately tell? Yeah, those shoulders, they need to be brought out massively. Not just a tiny amount, not just to this point, which would be like a, I don't know, typical, a regular fitting piece of garment, but this one is super exaggerated. So I can imagine that her shoulder, her actual shoulder, is sitting around this point here. How much do you think that we need to bring it out from where the shoulder typically is? I would say around 7 centimeters, 8 centimeters even. Let's have some fun. Let's try and do that ourselves. I'm gonna click here just to locate the component that I am trying to alter. And I'm gonna select this segment point by pressing Z, and I'm gonna bring it out. I wanna do it on the original line, right? So if I move it like this, you're gonna notice that, yeah, there we go. At some point it is gonna get highlighted in purple following the original line. So we're keeping the same angle for our shoulder. We might want to change it later, but as I am dragging the point, and again, it was highlighted with purple, then I'm gonna do the distance that I wanna move it by. Let's initially bring it out by, I don't know, let's say 16 millimeters, which is 1.6 centimeters. So we get to where a more typical blazer would be. And now we also need to affect the back. So I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. This is the back component. I'm gonna grab the segment point, start dragging it out, right click, I'm gonna do 16 mil. Awesome. Press space in order to simulate, and you're gonna notice that this is, yeah, maybe a bit more typical. If we brought the sleeve down, this is where a normal blazer would be. But again, the reference that we're going for is not your typical blazer by any stretch of the imagination. So now we want to follow exactly the same procedure. I'm gonna grab it, look for the highlighted purple, right click, and as I mentioned, I'm gonna do 75 mil. So 7.5 centimeters, okay? Bring the back, right click in order to be able to input a custom value, and do 75, okay? There we go, simulate. And now that I'm looking at the angle, it doesn't quite make sense because we actually want it going from here and we want it to stretch out as such. So maybe following the shoulder line to this point, but then not following the curve of the body. We want to actually bring it up. So I'm going to zoom out here, have a look at my line, and I'm going to grab both points by holding down Shift. And this time, let's try and bring it up, see what happens. So I'm holding down Shift, moving it vertically, okay, and let's raise it by 25 mil. Let's do some small increments, check out what effect it has, simulate. Okay, that kind of did something, still not perfect. And if I'm having a look here, this line does not make that much sense. Well, let's try and diagnose why that is. I'm gonna press B, and if I select here, I'm gonna notice that when I extended the back out, it actually completely changed my sewing line. So instead of keeping this segment that we did not alter the same, right? It actually made it wider as well. So in order to alter a sewing line, I'm gonna press B, and I want to, first of all, select the sewing line that I'm trying to alter, and below my cursor, a value is gonna pop up. I can see minus 23.4. This means that we're missing 23.4 millimeters, so 2.3 centimeters, which is quite large given the length of the total segment. Now, how do we alter it? We click on the segment, select the end of the sewing line that we actually want to move in, start dragging it, and you're gonna notice the blue dot pop up, which tells us where we ideally want to have our point. I'm gonna move it in, perfect. Now I'm gonna select the opposite one, and this one, I'm just gonna take it all the way. I know it's not matching in length, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm just gonna take it all the way so we have it consistent. We are still missing even a few centimeters here at the tip of the shoulder. I'm gonna move it, and now I'm gonna simulate again, just so it's releasing a bit of the tension. And now I can see that my line, instead of going all wonky like it was before, it was curved in the past, now it's actually going perfectly out. And if I press A, Control H, Now we can see that the fabric itself looks orange this time, but it hasn't actually changed the color of the fabric. All that is done is it strengthened the pieces. It's as if you're adding interfacing, some super strong interfacing onto your fabric. And if you are familiar with interfacing, it can be used to make any fabric stiff. You can also do it by selecting the components and right-clicking. You can see the shortcut here, Ctrl+H. So Ctrl+H, Ctrl+H. Now, when I simulate, you're gonna notice that my shoulders are actually starting to head outwards. And that's exactly what we want to see. It still looks very weird, we're nowhere near completion. We're actually seeing our pattern pieces become that tiny bit more, I don't know, Mugler-like. Now, let's head back to the reference, and before we move on with the shoulder and actually pin it down and get it perfect, we need to address the front panel, because at the moment our front panel is made of multiple components. It's made of 2 instead of just 1 for the Mugler. But now what we want to do is to actually connect those 2 panels here at the top, and we're gonna connect it all the way to where the tip of the nipple would be. How do we do that? I'm gonna press V, I'm gonna start deleting those curve points in order to straighten out our segment. And then I'm gonna look at this segment and I want to figure out where the nipple would be. So around this point here. I'm pressing X in order to add a segment point, so one of those black points. And now I wanna press V and clean up all of the curved points above my segment point. Why am I doing this? Because you can only connect a straight line onto a straight line in reality. You can't really do a curve that goes out like this to another curve that goes out like this. How would you connect those two? You can't. And now I'm gonna measure the length of this segment, and I'm gonna take this measurement and I wanna split this segment by the same amount. So I'm gonna press X, and this time instead of just looking for the value and clicking on it, which you could potentially do but it's not precise enough, you can right click and just input your value. So 248, press enter, there we go. But do keep in mind that this feature, just like the sewing, is dependent on where I have my cursor positioned. So if I press X and start from the base, right click, it's gonna start from the base, right? We wanna do it from the top. So you wanna make sure that you're above the middle point of your segment, right click and type in 248. Press enter, press OK, awesome. And now we're just looking to merge those 2 components together. So we have a singular front panel. I'm gonna press Z, select this segment, hold down Shift, select the segment that I want to connect it to, right click, and I'm gonna do merge. There we go. And you can kind of see the difference. So this is how much fabric we actually lost, but given the oversized nature of this garment, I feel like it's actually negligible. So we don't have to worry about it too much. The points here at the top, it looks like absolute garbage. I'm gonna select this segment point here, simply delete it. Then I want to select this one, I'm gonna convert it to a curved point. I wanna have as few of those curved points as possible, and then I want to make sure that I'm following roughly the same shape for the back panel. And I'm gonna correct it just so it looks that tiny bit more straight. So after all of those modifications, let's simulate again and figure out exactly what we obtained, what we have here. I'm gonna press Ctrl+A, Ctrl+H, Ctrl+H, just so we're strengthening the components. And as you can tell, those are no longer connected, but we can very easily do that. So I'm gonna press M, I'm gonna connect it from here to here and from here to here, just so we're sewing the components back together. And will you have a look at that, just how much better this actually looks. And next up, let's address the back, which is very obviously off. It shouldn't be like this. When you're having a look from the back, chances are it should be in alignment with the front. So if I got rid of the avatar only visually, I can go in this menu here, turn it on and off. You kind of want to have a very similar line that leads from this point and it goes up outside of the shoulder line as we discussed previously, but from the back it should be the same. It shouldn't actually look like this. With the avatar gone, even if I simulate, the avatar still behaves as if it's still there. So the simulation, the clothes still fall onto the avatar. How can we actually grab this point and shift it out? It's actually easier than you might think. I know it seems complicated, but it's not that difficult. check this out. So those two components, this one and this one respectively, they have this common segment point. If I press B, I can notice that they're actually sewn starting from that point, and it goes down towards the base. So if we actually want to affect this area, all that we have to do is to press Z, select those 2 points, and now we're gonna start shifting them towards the left. But as you can imagine, look at this. This is actually affecting the width of the garment as well. So we're not only adding fabric from this point and out, we're actually extending the entirety of the piece. So we're actually adding fabric around this area as well. So let's try it. I'm gonna select those 2 points, hold down Shift, take it towards the left side, right click to input my custom value, and for this I'm gonna try 4.5 centimeters or 45 mil. Cool. Now I'm gonna simulate and we'll have a look at that. It's becoming more and more aligned, is it not? From the front, from the back. Let's bring back the avatar just so it makes just that tiny bit more sense visually. And now maybe we want to actually bring it even further. So I'm gonna select those 2 points and I'm gonna shift them, let's say for another 35. Ah, simulate. And there you have it. We actually managed to add a lot of fabric and the garment is actually wrapping nicely around the body. But as you can probably notice from the back, so when we brought those segments over, check this out. We extended the back. But this time we can actually go back in and we can adjust it. So we're removing the fabric that we just added there. So I can press V, I can select those points here, I can delete them and start shifting this one up. So say you want to remove a bit of fabric, so it wraps tighter around the body. Check it. Now it has a bit of a bump, which, yeah, it coincides with this curve point. So I can simply drag it and smooth out the feature. Simulate again, and will you have a look at that? The back is sitting nice and flush, and it's actually starting to look incredibly nice. With not that much effort. We didn't go ahead and learn everything about fashion design, but yet we have a piece which is wrapping around the waistline and somehow is wide at the top. I think it's super interesting as a beginner to actually see that, yeah, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can develop my own pieces. This is kind of like architecture meets geometry. But before we proceed, let's start actually discovering some new issues that we have to address. I'm gonna head over into the library folder on the top left, select the avatar by double clicking, female v2, double click, pose, double click, and now let's find a different kind of pose. I want my avatar to actually bring her arms next to the body, which would be this pose here. FV2, 0 free, attention, press OK. And now you're gonna notice that the hands are going next to the body as the simulation is running. So we actually get to see the piece in the real world. Well, kinda. But at the same time, we're definitely gonna notice that since we extended the width out, which is definitely something that we do want, you can tell from here, so starting from around this point, the piece, the Mugler, actually goes out. So if I were to actually cut it from here and analyze the garment below this line, it would be a super tightly fitted piece. But from this point upwards, it's actually quite large. It's not just large, it's massive. It's super oversized for a lady's build. And this kind of contrast is what makes it super interesting and gives the brand its own identity. But as you can imagine, we kind of want the garment to not gather as much underneath the armpit like it is now, and we want it to be a bit more relaxed. What do you think we need to do in order to achieve that? I'm gonna tell you. We actually need to enlarge the hole, the arm opening. But you want to keep in mind, when you are doing this kind of modification, when you are doing this kind of garment, it's not going to be the most comfortable thing to wear in the real world. You can probably tell, fashion hurts. And when you're going for those super exaggerated silhouettes, it couldn't be more obvious. So The analogy that I like to use, imagine a pair of pants. If the crotch is here, which is like a regular pair, you can very easily walk in it. But what if we take the crotch and move it all the way towards the base? You can probably imagine that you have to tippy-toe around them because they're no longer going to be comfortable. And exactly the same thing happens here. Imagine this is the crotch, the armpit hole, the opening at the base. Imagine this is your crotch, right? Because the arm goes like this. Imagine this is a leg and the arm is another leg. Maybe it makes sense in your head. But the larger that we make this opening overall, the more difficult it is going to be to actually move. So you're not going to be able to lift your arm as comfortably or move it towards the front or towards the back as you're walking. So you kind of want to be careful because you could exaggerate the feature and then you're going to regret it. Press V, grab those points, shift them down, right? Enlarge the opening. And now have a look from the front. If I simulate, you're going to notice that now the tip is lifting up, right? It lifted up and it did it naturally. We didn't have to modify anything else. Cool. What if we go even lower? So let's say that I grab those points and move it all the way down here and maybe even open it up on this side. Get rid of this point so it goes straight down. Move this one as such, move this one as such. Let's say that we make the opening massive. Now when I simulate, you're gonna notice that the garment sits incredibly comfortably around the body, right? It does. Even like this, maybe around the back, we have a bit of excess fabric. We could even go inside of here. Press V, get rid of this point. Get rid of this point. So we're removing a bit of the fabric that we added in the past when we did this modification. Now simulate, and you're gonna notice that, yeah, this is actually wrapping incredibly nice around the body. But the problem is if you go this low, I know it looks good when you have your arms next to the body, but when you actually start walking, it's no longer gonna look this nice. So what you want to do is to make a tiny bit of a compromise. So you actually want to lift it up to the point where it kind of breaks. Where you have the fabric folded, it still looks decent. It's not as wide as it was before, but I reckon this is actually gonna work beautifully in the real world. Spoiler alert, we already did the piece and it does work. It works incredibly nice. Before we continue altering this area on the piece, I need to actually insert a segment point, the one that I mistakenly transformed into a curve point, and I need it for reference. When I'm looking at those two components, I can't tell exactly where this side, this segment, connects to this one. And in order to be able to tell, I'm gonna press B. I wanna select the sewing line, and I'm gonna notice that there is a difference. We're gonna fix this difference later, but what I want to do is to actually add a point here, a segment point. How do I do that? Well, if I press X, you're gonna notice that the sewing line disappears, so we no longer have a reference. I'm pressing B again, and this time I'm gonna right click, and I have those two options. Add point to pattern on start and add point to pattern on end. Which one do you think that we need here? Well, have a look at the notch. The notch is situated higher up compared to being here, lower. Therefore, we know that the sewing line starts here and it goes down. So, using that information, we should add a point to pattern on start. And now when I press Z, I can see the segment point showing up. What if we actually merge those two components? Let me try and press B, right click, I'm gonna do merge. Let's see what happens here. You can tell by looking at those dotted lines that we actually ended up sacrificing a lot of fabric. All of this got deleted in the process and it was merged together. So now when I simulate the piece, I can even strengthen it. You're gonna see that the problem persists. If I simulate now, this no longer has the shape that we were after. So we cannot do such a large, drastic modification without completely screwing up the work that we've done so far. So I'm gonna Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, and then we need to clean up those lines, but we're gonna do it manually instead. So let's try and align those two. Now I'm gonna press V and let's have a look at those curved points. For instance, I can tell that those here are not necessary. This one we can probably get rid of. And look how nicely that already cleaned up my line. What about this area here? We can definitely bring this point out in order to straighten the line. This one we can delete, and there we have it. Those lines are gonna be much nicer to actually connect. Even this one, I'm gonna take it out. And let's try and simulate and see if that changed our garment, if we screwed anything up. And I kind of get the sense that we didn't, which is actually some great news. But looking at the reference, I can see that this line is actually coming more towards the front of my design, as opposed to what we have here, because we can barely see it from the front angle. What if we want to shift this feature so it goes from here and to the point where it is already connected? I'm gonna press Z, I wanna grab those points, and I'm gonna start dragging them towards the left. So we're adding fabric onto this piece and removing it from this other component. There we go, maybe do it a bit further. Moving it as such, there we have it. Now it's actually, the seam line is in a more correct position than what we had before. We can even go inside of here, curve it in, there we go. Now it's wrapping even tighter around the body, which I think is a nice thing. But we can compensate for the fabric that we removed by simply adding it here. So we're not actually changing the feature, the design, we're only altering where the seam line is. There we go, that's much better. This one we can probably straighten out. You can see the line, you want it to go from here and you want it to be a bit smoother in its trajectory. There we go, sim again, and I think this is actually gonna cut it. It looks quite good, doesn't it? What if we go back into the pose folder and change it to what we had before? Let's make sure that we extend the arms. So we see how the garment actually transitions from this point. And we kind of want it from this point to head more towards this area. We want it to be a bit more drastic, a bit more contrast, because let's compare them side by side. You can tell that this line, it kind of has like a breaking point, and at the moment in our design it's actually quite smooth. So what if we wanted to do that instead? Well, let's try this. What if we grab this point and bring it this way, grab this point and bring it the opposite way? I did around 13 mil on both. Okay. Now it's not freed up all the way. We need to press V, bring down the current points a tiny bit. So again, it lets the arm rest, and there you have it. And it actually starts to look like the Mugler piece. I might actually want to bring back the shoulder a tiny bit. I'm clicking here in the 3D window to figure out by how much. Pressing Z, moving it in. Let's do it by 20 mil, so 2 centimeters. Awesome, I'm also gonna do the back at 20 mil. Okay, simulate, and now we can definitely see the piece looking a lot more like our reference, does it not? I'm not a big fan of the curve that we have here. I can press V, select the points. I wanna just straighten the line, get it as straight as possible. And now when I simulate, you're gonna notice that, yeah, we're actually getting there. V, move this one in, so it's even straighter, and there we have it. Now you can tell that there is a huge transition point here. Before we start working on the middle and lower sections, there is one thing that I want to go back to and actually modify a bit. Because having a look at the reference, this area here around the breast is not as pronounced. Now, depending on the shape of your body or the body that you're trying to actually make the clothing for, when we formed this piece around the body, we ended up having this super drastic dart and those two components heading in two wildly different directions. And if you go even further, then the tip would be even pointier. This is how it works. So this dart actually plays a role because it's grabbing, try and imagine in the real world, it's grabbing this component, pushing it in, therefore forming a tip. Okay? So in order to change it and flatten it out, here's what we have to do. I'm gonna introduce a new tool here, which is called the trace tool. With it, we're able to access those baselines that were created when we merged the two components together. So they're only there for reference. They're not useful, you couldn't alter them, you cannot edit them. But now we want to turn those baselines back into internal lines. And those internal lines can be used in order to cut the pattern pieces.
So with the trace tool, you want to select the baseline, you want to press enter on your keyboard. And then when I press Z, you're gonna notice that the baseline is now a red line. So an internal line. And those we can alter just as we did with those external segments. So for instance, I can press V, I can curve it, I can do whatever I want. We're gonna work a lot more with those internal lines later down the line, but at this stage we're just gonna use it in order to split the components back. So we kind of go back a few steps to where we came from. Select it, right click, and I'm gonna do cut and sew. Okay, I've selected the option yes. It extended it out a bit. If that doesn't show up, let me just show you what you have to do. So for instance, if I make it shorter like this, and I right click and try to cut it, it's not gonna work. It kind of does something, it does create a cut, but it doesn't split the component in two. So I need to Control Z. Now we're back to having a simple internal line. You can right click, extend, trim, and add point to pattern outline. That simply extends it and it adds a segment point here, which is selectable. Now, Z, select the internal line, right click, cut and sew. And this time you don't see the error here, which asks you, hey, do you want to extend it out or do you not? It just doesn't show up. Now that we have those two shapes that we had in the past, here's what I'm gonna do in order to make this feature not as pronounced, to pretty much get it more flat chested. I'm gonna press Z, I'm gonna select this point, and I just want to move it in a bit. Let's say I wanna do 12 mil on this side, and then I want to do 12 mil, or even less, I might do just 8 mil on the opposite side. So check what that did. We pretty much removed fabric across the entirety of the pattern, but we only want to remove it around this area. So we need to go back in and add a bit of this fabric back. By pressing V, making a selection box, I'm gonna delete a few of those curve points, and I just want to flatten this feature out so you don't have as much fabric missing from underneath the breast. And this is in effect gonna simply flatten the entire piece. And I just want to check it. I want to see what this looks like. I think we're actually on the right track here. And how can we merge those two components back together? Well, you can either press B, select the sewing line, right click merge, or there is of course another technique. You can simply press Z, select this line, hold down shift, select the line that you want to connect it to, and then I'm gonna right click and go merge. There we have it. So now we have a lot more of those baselines, and this just keeps happening whenever you're merging pattern pieces. Now I'm gonna strengthen the entire piece just so it has the interfacing, or it acts like a stiffer fabric, which we are gonna use anyways in the real world. And now I'm gonna simulate. Check this out. So the feature is now actually just following the body. It's not the pointy tip that we had in the past. And of course you can flatten it out all the way if you feel so inclined, but I don't recommend it. This is a woman's body and you do want it wrapping around the curves of the body. And I think this amount actually is going to look incredible for the shape that we're looking to create. But what if you find those baselines distracting? Well, I'm gonna select the trace tool. I'm gonna select the baseline, delete, select the baseline, delete, select the baseline, delete. Keep doing that, clean up the pattern. Then I want to add a curve here so we don't have those separate segments. The shoulder line should be just a simple segment, right, with curve points. So I'm gonna press Z, right click, and convert to curve point. There we have it. Now when I simulate, this is so much better, so much cleaner, so much nicer. I still have an issue here, or maybe not so much. We could eliminate a bit of the fabric in this side of the body. Let's do that. V. Taking those curve points, shifting them in. At this point, you don't want to make super drastic changes. We're gonna stick to some minor ones. And I'm looking at the opening on the arm here. I might want to tuck the feature in front and at the back of our shoulder. We don't have as much of an opening. We only want to keep the opening here at the base and at the top, right? Because we're going to use padding in order to elevate it and make it sit as such. So how exactly can we now remove a bit of the fabric here? Well, we have two options. We can of course grab this segment and move it in,
right? Which is automatically gonna grab this one and shift its position. Or we can do the opposite. We can grab this one and move it this way, which is 100% the option that I'm gonna go for. And yeah, let's try it now. So I'm gonna go to the front panel. I'm gonna select this side of the body and check this out. I just wanna grab this point, move it in, let's say let's not do such drastic modifications. I'm gonna right click and input 12. There we go. So this in effect is kind of like grabbing the piece and doing this. It just tucks it in that tiny bit more. Let's do it at the back. See how that looks. Right click, do 12 mil. Check it. Boom. And it's not making the biggest difference in the world, but we could of course check this out. So if I went in all the way, let's say we do it by 4 centimeters, check how much that actually wraps around the body, right? But we don't want to go that far. And I feel like that's not doing enough of the effect that I'm after. We still want to keep this shape. Remember, this is why we did the drastic modification, but I might have to go in here and actually decrease the width a tiny bit. So this entire segment, I'm going to press Z, select the top. I want to do it by 1 centimeter. Okay. Select the back, move it towards the left, 1 centimeter. So we're doing 2 centimeters in total. Okay, yeah, you can see it now. This is actually tightening up the hole quite a bit. And I think it's not keeping the effect that we want on this area. Maybe not so much, but we can work on it differently. So we can actually press V and start adding to this curve. Okay, I'm gonna add a bit of width here. And it's gonna have the same effect, but it's only gonna do it at the top as opposed to having it at the base as well. I'm gonna grab this point, extend it out. Okay. There we go. And now I wanna locate the area that I'm trying to add to. I'm gonna create a curve point here. So at my breaking point. And then I want to add a bit of width on this side as well. So we're adding fabric this way. Let's now simulate. There we go. It added a bit. Do we need to do more? We could, in theory, if the piece is not too tight, I'm gonna open up the strain map. I feel like it's already on the body, so we cannot cut from it. So all that we can do is to add to it. So let's just keep adding a bit more till we get the definition that we're after. So starting from this point, I kind of want it to end up here. Okay, that's the mission. So let's try and add even more. I'm gonna make the shape. You can see the curve here, just how much more dramatic it is from just a few millimeters. I'm gonna add as such. I want to shift this point down maybe a bit, and I'm gonna extend this one out. Okay, you can see how dramatic it is at the back as well. Now let's have a look. And I think this is actually getting us there. You can see now the shape. And as you can tell, this is a very iterative process. So we can go back in here, we can extend this one back out, and we can, yeah, it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but that's the thing. You kind of want to perfect it. You want to do super small alterations. So I'm keeping it at around 12 mil at all times, so I don't actually end up ruining the garment. Here, I feel like this opening should be closed up a bit. So I'm pressing V. Moving this line in, moving this line up, lifting those points. Okay, do it even more. We want it to be close to the arm. There we go. This actually looks quite good, but now the line is all messed up. Or maybe not so much. We need to bring this point, select the two components. Let's try 11 mil. There we go. There we go. As I mentioned in the past, the opening, you don't want to have it too large because then you cannot move in the piece easily. Cool, and we can even grab the point at the shoulder. I'm gonna grab both points, so for the front and the back panel, and I'm gonna lift them just a tad. Right click, and I'm gonna do 8 mil. I'm not gonna exaggerate. There we go, and this simply straightens out the line for my shoulder. And if you're not happy with the curve that we currently have, we can even go ahead and delete the curve points entirely. So we're gonna have completely straight lines, and once I simulate, you're gonna see what kind of effect that has. So when I simulate, check it. Now the feature is literally straight. There we have it. And this is gonna work so much better than what we had in the past with the super large opening. So let's try and work on the logic of the modifications that I made, because they might not look like much, right? They might not look like much. When you're looking at this tutorial, you might feel, oh my god, dude, he's barely touching those points. Are we really seeing that much of a difference? Yeah, the difference is huge. This is definitely what you need to do as a fashion designer. Do small iterations and stack them on top of one another. There's no like magic formula. Okay, let's say if it was this easy, I grab this point, I move it here, boom, the garment fits, it's perfect. No such thing. I'm gonna control Z because that was an absolute abomination of a design. But that's the thing, you kind of have to do a small touch here, a small touch here, add a bit of fabric, remove a bit of fabric, curve it in, curve it out. So for instance, like I was looking here, I know that below this point, right, the waistline, let's open up the reference. I know that below this point, I shouldn't be touching the garment. It was designed to fit the body from the very beginning. Why would I touch it? I know that I only want to add fabric from this point and heading up. So that's exactly what I was after here. I might even go back in this point. Maybe it was better moved towards the left. Let's see it. So it straightens out the line that I'm after here. It's all like in the details. The devil is in the details with fashion design. And yeah, you're just gonna have to experiment, grow a sense for it. And I feel like the best way is to actually make the garment at some point. Once you feel like it is fitting properly, once you feel like you love the design that you've created, you should definitely grab a sewing machine, do it, and see what other minor alterations you might have to do. And now that we kind of finalized the upper half, we should start looking from this line and downwards. What I'm gonna do next is to start cleaning up this area, because at the moment you can see that it is kind of wobbly, and I want this line to actually be leading straight down, and I want the end to be straight. So how can we do that? I'm gonna press Z, look for the front panel, I'm gonna grab this point and move it down. Let's start with that. Then I want to ensure that the curve on this side is actually only going in. At the moment it's going in and is going out, which is kind of subtle. You really have to pay attention to see it. But check how much of a difference this single millimeter is gonna do. So I'm grabbing this point here and I just want to curve it as such. When I simulate, you're gonna see just how much nicer this looks optically. Just because we have those correctly leading lines. It's kind of like in photography. What makes a picture interesting? If you have leading lines. The same with design. We have every single point starting from the shoulder, it leads to here. And the cleaner those lines look, the better your design prowess. Let's now take care of the back. And again, since we don't have a reference from the back for this piece, we just have to eyeball it. But let's just start developing our sense of design, right? This is what the front looks like. This is what the back looks like. Does this feel correct to you? Because I know it definitely doesn't for me. So what I want to do first is to make sure that this point is actually the same width as it is in the front, since it needs to go in between the legs and it's just not going to work if it's this wide. I'm pressing G in order to access the internal line tool, and I'm going to form an internal line here. Awesome. Then I want to make sure that I'm grabbing this point, bringing it out just a bit so that when I am cutting my segment, it makes a clean cut. I want to grab it, push it up against the edge, Z, right click, I'm going to do cut, and I'm going to eliminate those components down the middle. They were simply following the shape of the bum, right? That's why this was happening. Then I want to even select this point. I'm going to straighten it, the curve point. You can see the gathering of the fabric, it kind of goes away. I'm going to strengthen the entire piece again. There we have it. And now I'm gonna grab this segment point and I'm gonna bring it down. There we go. And now it's all straightened out. Perfect.
but we're still kind of missing a bit from the length of the piece, and let's just add it. I'm gonna grab this segment, I'm gonna hold down Shift, start dragging it down, and let's say that I'm gonna add, I don't know, 12 centimeters, so 120 mil. It's better in this situation to just have it longer than shorter because you can always overlap them and figure out exactly how you want to connect them. Cool, but as you can see, when I grabbed the segment and brought it down, this caused a lot of issues. First of all, those segments here are disconnected, but then we can kind of see the entire garment is being pushed up. Why do you think that is? Well, it is because the sewing line, if I press B, the sewing line also got shifted down. So we're connecting a shorter segment onto a longer segment. Thus, the longer segment, it kind of behaves like a shorter segment. It's just pulling it upwards. And in order to release it, press B, select the sewing line and start dragging this point up in order to match them perfectly in length. And now when I simulate, you're gonna see that all of that tension is actually completely released. Then I want to also extend out the back sewing line. Again, B, select the base, shift it all the way down, look for the opposite component, shift it all the way down. And now when I simulate, it's all linked up. Let's say that we want to also extend the front. Let's do exactly the same thing. So I'm gonna drag it down. I don't know. At this stage, it doesn't matter that much. I'm gonna do 42 mil. Perfect. And guess what happened on this side? Exactly the same thing. So I need to press B, go in here and correct my sewing line. Whenever you have a line without a segment point delineating where it is sewn, you're actually going to be dragging the entire feature down. So you have to be careful with that. Let's simulate and you can see the tension being completely released. And while we're at this stage, why don't we actually try and correct for every single sewing line before we proceed? Because at the moment, if I go and have a look here, this segment here is 298. This one is 314, which doesn't make too much sense. We don't want to be connecting longer segments onto shorter segments. We want them to be equal. Even here at the shoulder, 182.5, 191.7. As we were designing this organic looking piece, when you're doing more geometric ones, it's easier to keep track. We completely got lost in the sauce. We were not paying attention at the sewing lines, and now we're completely screwed. We have to start all over again. No, we don't. Okay? All that you have to do is to look for this tool here, which is the check sewing length. I'm gonna input a length difference of 1 millimeter. So every single sewing line which has an error larger than 1 millimeter is gonna show up. Okay, and then I just want to go in and I'm gonna adjust the segment lengths. So for instance here, this one is 314.2, but this one is already shaped perfectly. We worked so hard on this piece, so I feel like the only option that we have is to actually extend the length on this one. By how much? I'm gonna press B, I'm gonna click onto the sewing line and Chloe is gonna do the math for me. So 16.2. Then I wanna press Z, start dragging it out, and I'm gonna do 16.2. Cool. It still has a bit of an error because it's not a perfectly straight line. And now, instead of extending the length, I can just go in and curve the piece in. So I'm looking to achieve the value of 314.2 here. And I'm gonna remove a bit of fabric from this area. So I'm gonna select this curve point, 314. Maybe this is deleting too much. Let's try it this way. Okay. I've straightened it out. It's still not good enough. B, the difference is 1.5 at this stage. Start dragging it down, 1.5. And now the redness is completely gone. It still has a 0.2 difference, but it shouldn't make too much of a difference, if at all. Fabric has elasticity. You're not going to cut it perfect. You just want to ensure that you get it as close to perfection as possible, at least inside of CLO3D, because then you're going to add errors in the real world. I'm going to simulate and make sure that I haven't altered the piece and destroyed it, which seems to be the case. We're fine. What about the opposite segment here? Well, I'm going to press B, check what the difference is. This one, I could potentially just grab the sewing line and shift it down. I think that's going to work in this case here at the back. It was below 1 centimeter of an error, and yeah, this actually looks good. What about the shoulders? Well, if you have a look here, it doesn't make any sense because we have multiple sewing lines. So why is that? It's only one segment connected onto another one segment. It doesn't make sense to have multiple sewing lines. So I'm gonna select this one, delete it. I'm gonna select this one, delete it. And you know what? I wanna teach you a new tool. So I'm gonna also select that one and delete it. When you have two segments which you know should be connected together, you can use the N tool. I haven't used it because I feel like the M tool is just much more versatile, but for quicker operations, N will do just fine. So I'm gonna click here, and the next time when I'm sewing it, I wanna make sure that I'm paying close attention to where the notch is. Because when I move the cursor up or down the shoulder, you can see it here, it actually changes how we're sewing the components together. So what I'm looking to do is to have this, okay? And now there's a single sewing line. It's still not matched up in length. In order to do that, I'm pressing B, checking what my difference is. This one seems to be 9.1. Therefore, Z, select the point, bring it in, type in 9.1 after right clicking, simulate, and there you have it. Now we don't have any errors whatsoever in the design, so we can proceed moving forward, knowing that we're not working on a complete dud. So let's try and connect the front with the back. But in order for the connection to make sense, you want to make sure that at their meeting point, they are the exact same width. Because at the moment, the front is a lot narrower. It has 14.9, while the back has 37.3. Therefore, I need to grab this one here and I'm gonna tuck it in to 14.9. You can zoom in to get a bit more precise with it. There we have it. But when I did that, guess what? It introduced another error since we don't have a point, right? Press B, just shift it up, and this should actually do the trick. Simulate. What if we want to sew those components together? Well, this is one of those situations, those super rare situations where actually sewing it in the 3D window is easier than doing it in the 2D window. Because then you have to figure out which piece goes where, whatever. Let's not worry about it. I'm gonna press N in order to access the segment sewing tool. I wanna make sure that I'm starting from the left of this segment and connecting it here. And since the components are mirrored, they're symmetrically linked, which you can tell by looking for this line here. This blue line is telling you that, hey, those two components are linked. When we did Control D, this is what we achieved. And it also links their sewing. So you only have to connect one side, it's automatically gonna connect the opposite side. The same situation happened here at the shoulder. We only had to sew those two components and automatically they got sewn on the opposite side. Now I'm gonna simulate and let's just make sure that there is enough room here and that it's not too tight or too large. And I honestly feel like this is perfect. Remember, we have a bit of a buffer onto our avatar. We added 5 millimeters just to ensure that when we're working the piece, it's not gonna be too tight in the real world. But I'm gonna select the avatar and I'm gonna do a skin offset of 0 instead of the 5 that we had. Simulate and have a look at how this is fitting. And I honestly feel this is close to perfection. We could maybe tighten it up, but the thing is we're gonna do a bit of an overlap in order to add snaps, okay? So we kind of want it longer, and in order to form that overlap we're gonna have to extend it even further. So I might even go back here, bring it down, let's add a bit more, let's do 25 mil extra. B, select the sewing line, lift it up, correct it, perfection. So you kind of want it to be loose like this, again, just so you have the option of overlapping them, which we're gonna get a bit more technical at the atelier. At this stage, I'm not even gonna be bothered with this. I'm simply gonna delete the sewing line and let it hang as such. We know for a fact that now they're completely doable in the real world. Amazing. Let's now start working onto the next component, which would be this one here. The short skirt, which is inflated, it has a bit of a filler, it likely has a bone or, I don't know, like a tube inside of it. Let's first of all design the components that are forming it. And my intuition when looking at this is telling me that there should be 3 components. The first one is this one, which simply hangs out. Then we should create another one for the end, for the edge, locking it in. And then we of course need the third one, which is simply gonna link up all of them together. So it starts, it gets sewn here, it goes out, then it goes in, and then it goes all the way back, and they're connected on the same sewing line. Let's try and come up with a plan. First of all, I want to figure out where I want to connect it. So chances are I want it to actually start at this segment, go here, and end here. Correct? We don't want it hanging towards the front because that would make it super inconvenient. It would go in between the legs. You wouldn't be able to walk with this. We want to have it starting higher up, and I think that those 3 segments are perfect. So we have that narrowed down. How about we try and figure out how long those segments are together so we can actually create a piece using that measurement. I want to close down the check sewing length because it's adding a bit more information on screen and I do not want to be bothered by it. I might even go inside of here, get rid of the heat map since now we just want to have a look at the design itself. And let's measure those 3 segments. We could potentially, like, I don't know, maybe open up the calculator, do the math, 230.4 plus whatever, 100. But that wouldn't be very efficient, would it? In CLO, it's actually a lot easier. Press Z, hold down Shift and click. Boom. This adds up the first value that I've selected. Then let's add up the next segment and then the final one, and we can get a final reading. So a total sum of the length that we've just measured. 506.9. Now I'm gonna press S in order to bring out the rectangle tool. You can also select it from here, but I strongly encourage you to learn this shortcut. I'm gonna click in the neutral space where I don't have any pieces floating around, and I'm gonna type it in 506.9. and in terms of the height, I don't know, let's start with something quite slim. I'm gonna do 40 mil. Awesome. So this segment, I want to link it up here. What's like the most efficient way to sew it all together? Well, you can use the M tool, start with the longer segment, take it all the way from one side to the other, click. That tells CLO that, hey, this is my first sewing line, and then it wants to know where do I want to connect it to. And since there are multiple segments, we have to hold down Shift. You're gonna see that the line, the purple line, yours might not be purple, it might have a different color because it randomizes the color of your sewing line so you can differentiate them. I'm gonna hold down Shift and I wanna start from here, take it up, keep holding down Shift. You do not wanna release it. Then click here, click here, click here, and click here. And after you finish the second selection, that's when you want to release Shift. So that's gonna form a sewing line which links up all the components from one side to the other. That's like by far the easiest way. I'm gonna move it closer in the 3D window. I can even click on it, rotate it this way so I'm helping it. Or there is an even better way to position things inside of the 3D space, the ones that you've just created. I'm gonna instead right click and do superimpose side. Okay, and that kind of snapped it in place. Maybe it's not the perfect position. Just move it out a bit and then simulate. Huh. So, yeah, we're now kind of getting an idea that this could be the skirt, I guess. It doesn't look perfect at this stage. What about if we strengthen it by pressing Ctrl H? Okay. Huh. Maybe you want to make it, I don't know, taller. Let's extend it out. Look for the shape. Try and understand if this is gonna work. Let's look at the reference and figure out why our skirt is heading down as opposed to heading out. The angle should be a bit more like this, shouldn't it? And you could argue that, yeah, you can kind of achieve that with the filler, but we can do it even better by using geometry. I feel like maybe you want to click away. Oh my god, this is getting already very complicated. Trust me, it's not. I've even made a reel about this topic. I did it on a collar and how it should be designed. You definitely want to follow us on IG because we're giving out quick tips. And if you've seen that reel on the collar shape, you're gonna know that what you want to do in this situation is to kinda, I'm gonna do it very quickly. I'm gonna add a point here, add a point here. You actually want to curve it down. So instead of sewing a straight segment onto this curved segment, we're going the opposite way. And check what happens when I simulate. What? Now it's heading up? Insanity, right? It's still not matching in length, it's not perfect, we still have to do a lot of alterations, but I've shown you this just so you understand the principle. So say I wanted to exaggerate it even further. Say I went something like this and I scaled it down so they're kind of matching in length. Let's look for that 509 figure. I'm just doing it very, very quickly, but then we're gonna get into more detail. 502, that's gonna match. Check what happens here. Now it's actually starting to go up. And if we exaggerate it even further, we might be able to get it perfectly flush here. Complete insanity, what a bit of geometry can do when it meets fashion design and enthusiasm. Let's figure out a better way of actually doing this effect. I'm gonna select the component and guess what? I'm just gonna delete it. Sorry about that. We worked so hard on understanding it, but now we at least have a plan. All right, we know roughly what we want to do. We just have to figure out the best way to actually do it. And I think you're gonna find this technique quite helpful, especially if you're trying to do collars or any other shape that wraps around the garment. Check this out. So the very first thing that I'm gonna do, I'm pressing Z, holding down Shift, selecting those two segments, the ones that we know are gonna be connected to one another. Right click, match up to end. And now we want to apply the 180-degree rule. So we need to know for a fact that the transition between those points is super smooth. And at the moment it's not. This looks like a corner. It's very shallow, but it is still a corner. V, I'm gonna select this curve point, bring it down. And then I might even select this one and do this. So now I know for a fact that there is a smoother transition between those two panels. Let's also address the back one. So Z, hold down Shift, select the two, right click, match up to end. Awesome, and this one already has a very good flow. I don't think I should modify anything. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z. I wanna move this piece back and I'm also gonna rotate it so it's roughly in the same position that we started from. Instead of trying to eyeball and make the shape kind of follow the same language as I have here, check this out. I'm gonna select this one, and select this one, since I know that those three components is where I want to attach my small skirt. I'm gonna press Ctrl C and Ctrl V in order to copy and paste them. And then I'm gonna left click in order to paste them here. Amazing. Then I'm gonna press Z, select those points, right click, and I'm gonna do an offset as internal line. So as you can see, what this achieves is it creates an internal line from the segment that we've selected. In terms of the width, I'm gonna try and do 25 mil for now. We can always modify the shape later. You wanna make sure that extend is ticked, because if it's not, then the lines are not gonna be onto the actual pattern piece. They stray. This one even becomes larger than the pattern piece. Just make sure that extend is on for this procedure. Press OK, and with them still selected, I'm gonna right click immediately and do cut. Then A, I'm gonna select the components that I no longer need and I'm gonna delete them. And now all that I have to do is to actually link those together. And the best way to do that, since they are already sewn together, is to press B, select the sewing line, right click, merge. Go for the next one, select the sewing line, right click, merge. What I've obtained here is exactly the same shape that we had before. But now if we wanted to attach it, it would have to be rotated as such, and it will link up starting from here to here, and from here to here to here to here. But say we want to just keep it on the same side of the body, since we worked on the left side of the avatar. I'm gonna rotate it back, and I'm gonna right click, and we can flip it horizontally, and that's gonna achieve exactly the same thing. Now I can rotate the piece, and you can already see this segment goes here, the smaller segment goes here, and the final one goes here. Let's try and sew it and see what it would actually look like if we kept the shape like this. M, select the longer segment, then hold down Shift, click from here to here, click, 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 click. There we go. Then we want to go to the 3D window, right click, and I'm gonna do superimpose side and simulate.
We can also strengthen it. So I'm doing Control H. Awesome. Say it's too thin at this stage. I'm not quite happy with how thin it came out. What I need to do now is to select those points, hold down Shift, select these. I'm gonna do Convert to Curve Point. And you're gonna see those weird jagged edges. Just press V, select them, get rid of them. It was just a small error that we had when we did the offset internal line, but that's fine, very easy fix. And then I can just select this one, just to eyeball it, make sure that we're heading in the right direction. I'm gonna select those curve points, delete them, select this one here, delete it, and simulate. I wanna just ensure that the skirt actually flows with my design, which it 100% does. This looks beautiful. Now I'm gonna press Z, select those points here. I'm gonna do Convert to Curve Point. Awesome. So this line perfectly replicates the one that we're connecting it to. Those here, I'm gonna select, also convert them to a curve point. And now, when I simulate, you're gonna notice that we actually have the intended geometry. Then, I want to select those curve points and I need to actually taper it in. There we go. Those here. I can probably delete all of this. Try to keep it as simple as possible. And now, when you have a look at this, I think it actually feels brilliant. We might even want to go in. Something like this. How awesome is this? Cool. If you want to bring the skirt just that tiny bit further out, I'm gonna press V, select the three curved points, and then I can just drag them down. Hold down Shift. Maybe it's something like this. Let's make sure that we're checking with our reference. And I think, yeah, this actually looks very, very good. We can even go from the taller angle here. We can try to tuck it in, make sure that it looks good from every single profile. You can just play with it. At this stage is actually, you know, having fun with design. This one is a bit too pointy. Again, tuck it in. Tuck it in. Awesome. And I think, yeah, now it actually flows beautifully. I want to select this entire segment and we need to create the piece that goes below it. And in order to do it, I'm just gonna copy the same one and I'm gonna paste it here. I'm gonna do it maybe how you might feel inclined to. I'm just gonna connect this segment to this segment and let's see what happens. Yeah, so this probably feels completely wrong. We can even control the angle. We can go in here, press B, select it, and as the simulation is running, we have control over our folding angle. So let's try and fold it in, right? We fold it in. It's got too much excess, right? It's not gonna work. It does something, but it's not good. You can definitely see this. What if we instead sew it the opposite way? So now I'm deleting the line altogether, grabbing the piece, rotating it as such, and I'm gonna flip it again. So I wanna right click and select flip horizontally, just so we are following the mirrored effect, right? You see this tip is smaller, this tip is longer. We wanna make sure that we're connecting them as such. And now I'm gonna instead try and sew it like this. So now I'm doing the outer segment, the convex one, onto the opposite convex one. So now let's simulate, wait for it to do its thing. It still looks off, right? But let's now try and control the angle. So B, select the sewing line, make sure that the simulation is running. And now let's start changing the angle. And what do you notice now? This actually starts to look exactly how we want it to look, does it not? We need to, of course, add a bit of filler here, which is gonna give it a bit more structure. Now we're only working with folding angles, which doesn't make that much sense. But there we go. Now you probably see the power of curves inside of CLO3D, inside of fashion design as a whole. But what about the final connecting piece? Because at the moment we can't do this. Where would we add a filler? We need to close the final wall, and I'm gonna make the avatar disappear just so we try to figure it out together. How do you think this shape should look? I can even select all the other components, Okay, hold down shift, select this one as well. And on the keyboard, I'm gonna press shift Q, which does not delete them, it just makes them go away. How do you think this shape should look in order to close our final product? Just by looking at it, I can tell that we need a convex shape and we also need a convex shape here. So we're gonna create it from scratch. I'm pressing S, creating a rectangle. I'm gonna do the standard size for now. Selecting the side, I'm gonna unfold symmetric with editing. Z, I wanna shrink it down. It doesn't have to be that tall. That's gonna be massive. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, maybe it's something like this. And then I'm gonna grab this point, lift it up, grab this point, bring it down. Then I'm gonna press V, create a couple curve points. This one I need to bring up, something like that. This one I need to bring down, something like that. They're still a bit too tall here. Ideally, we want those points touching. Let's just get them super close together to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. V, now we want to correct the shape. And now all that I have to do is to open up my calculator. I'm gonna take the value that I want it to become, right? So this one is 503.5, 503.5, divide it by 2, first of all, because this one works in halves. I'm gonna do this, and then this is the value that I want my half to become. At the moment it's 513.1, but we want it to become that. So we divide the value that we want by the value that we have. 513.1 equals times 100, and this is gonna give us the percentage. I'm copying 2 decimal points because that's how many we can introduce inside a CLO. Pressing A, selecting my shape, scaling it down, and Control V in order to input my percentage. I'm pressing OK, and now let's sew it. I'm gonna do M, start from one side, take it to the opposite side, and then I'm just gonna connect it here. Let's try and do it only on one side and see if it has the correct tendency. I'm gonna superimpose, let's try under this time. And when I simulate, what do you notice? This is literally perfect. Because in the real world, we're just gonna connect those ends together. Let's also connect them inside a close. So M, take it from one side to the other. Take it from one side to the other. Now simulate. In order to make the garment visible, I'm gonna press Shift and W. And will you have a look at this? This is only because of the sewing here. Do not worry about it too much. It probably goes, yeah, it goes on the side. Whatever, zoom in, make sure that we're releasing that. And there you have it. And before I duplicate it to the opposite side, I need to get rid of this mirroring line, because you can't have objects that are linked symmetrically with a mirroring line. It doesn't work in CLO like that. So I'm gonna press Z, remove the linked editing, press A. I wanna make a selection, and tell me if you still remember how we copied one side of the garment to the opposite side. Do you remember? We need to do Control D. Click it next to it, Control H in order to strengthen, and Sim to simulate. How amazing is this? Look what you've done. Look what you've achieved. This probably felt completely impossible at the start of our tutorial. And now, yeah. Let's bring the avatar back. How amazing is this? Having a look at the reference, here's what I'm gonna do next. I wanna create the double-breasted effect, which means that we actually want to have this overlap. And how exactly is this done? Well, let's start first of all by dragging our line down. We wanna have it just below the breast to maybe around the point here. Then I'm gonna press B, and I want to drag my sewing line down just so I'm opening up the blazer. Do it on the opposite side as well. Now I'm gonna simulate. Next, I'm gonna select the line, I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna add a point to pattern on end. The start is at the base, so we want to add it on end. Then I need to get rid of those curve points here. They're not gonna help me at all. Therefore, I'm gonna select them, get rid of them. It's gonna straighten it out. And let's see if that actually changes our design too much. It made this area a bit narrower. So we could potentially compensate by bringing it out. I don't know, let's say 5 millimeters, something like that. Maybe even a bit more. Drag it by an extra 4. Huh? Yeah, there we have it. I think I'm quite happy with this. Now, I'm gonna press V. I wanna get rid of those points here. I can even get rid of this point here. And I wanna keep it as such for now. Let's take care of the overlap. And the principle is we want the garment to actually stay the same. We just want to add a bit extra fabric here so we can form our overlap. Let's try and figure out exactly to what point it leads. And it seems like it goes maybe to around this area here. Yeah, something like this. So how am I gonna do that? How am I gonna keep a point of reference that I can have sewn at all times, which is gonna act kind of like a button, yet still add fabric on top? Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna grab this point and I'm gonna start shifting it out, say by 25 mil. And I know that I've extended both components out by 25. I'm gonna press Z, I'm gonna select this segment and I'm gonna offset it as an internal line. This time I wanna untick the extend option and I'm gonna do it by the same amount, so 25. All that I've done here, I've introduced an internal line which represents my old components for the design, giving me freedom to actually adjust this independently. But there is a bit of an issue because if I simulate, you're gonna notice that, they are still connected here on the exterior. No problem. Press B, select the sewing line, now N, and I'm gonna sew it. Make sure that you have the notches aligned at the base or at the top. Then I'm gonna simulate. So pretty much we have exactly the same design that we started with. I'm gonna grab this component and move it on top and then resimulate, hoping that it's gonna arrange itself. Let's see if that works. We got a bit of a collision issue here, which is very common inside a CLO. When you have a situation like this, you kind of have to just drag it around till it pops out. There you go. That one popped out. Did it work? Yeah, all the way to the base. There we have it. So pretty much this is the overlap. And now when I am controlling the exterior of my design, guess what? It doesn't affect the internal line. It stays connected as we had it when we were designing. And that's super, super helpful for what we're trying to achieve here. Because all that I want to do is just grab this point and I want to kind of align it here. So I'm gonna maybe drag it down, take it more towards the right. Something like this. And I think actually having it on this line makes it even better looking. I'm gonna stick to that. And then we need to tuck it in. So I'm gonna press Z, select this point, and we need to bring it in. We still have a bit of an issue here with the overlap, but honestly think that the double-breasted effect that we were after is good. In order to fix the overlap here, have them actually sitting on top of one another, I'm gonna grab the internal line and maybe shift it in a bit like this. Nah, we might actually have to reshape the entire thing. So I need to take this point, bring it out, and I need to tuck the opposite side in. Okay, and yeah, honestly think this is gonna work. And we could even make it asymmetrical. I think that's like the ultimate solution to our problem here. At this stage, there's no point in overcomplicating the design. Now that we have the overlap, let's make sure that we check with the reference. We can see it's by the side of this line. We could potentially shift it in, but I don't know. Are we after this to make it perfectly identical, or do we just want to learn the techniques that were used there? Because again, if you want to have it identical, so having the line parallel, in order to do that, we need to affect the entirety of the front panel. So we need to shift this feature outwards. And that means that there's a lot of work. And unless you're Mugler and you want to keep your product consistent, I think keeping it to this stage is actually good enough for now. Let's start addressing the collar piece and the lapel. We're going to treat it as a separate component, and then we're going to reattach it when we are preparing the patterns for printing. So the lapel itself, let's see up to which point it actually goes. Maybe something around this area. Yeah, around this height. So I'm gonna move this segment point. I want to move it up. I'm pressing Z. Unfortunately, the reference disappears, but it's fine. I also want to straighten this line, which is going to cause a bit more of an overlap. Okay. You want to make sure that the arm is sitting on the shoulders perfectly. And now let's start shaping the lapel. So I'm going to press Z, take a measurement of this. So 306.9, I'm pressing S in order to add a rectangle. And I'm doing 306.9 and I'm going to do it by 40. Doesn't matter, we can alter it later. Z, I'm going to simply delete one of the points. And now I want to grab this one. I can even match it up. So Z, select the segment, hold down Shift, right click, match up to start. Perfect. And click on the two components, go into the 3D window, right click, do superimpose over. There we have it. And now in order to copy it to the opposite side, I'm gonna do Control D. So the same function, whenever you want something to be symmetrical, this is how you do it. Cool, but you're gonna notice that it has a tendency to actually flip out, which is not ideal. It would do that in the real world unless you actually, you know, iron it and force it into that position. But there is a technique in CLO that we can use. I did Control Z to go back to this step. And when you wanna make sure that something is not gonna roll out in CLO, here's what you have to do. Press B, select the sewing line which is causing you issues, and instead of having it on custom angle, you want to do it turned, which means that it sandwiches the two layers together, almost as if they're ironed together. This is going to be the lapel. We just want to now reshape it in order to achieve this. We need to grab this point, right, which coincides with this point here. We need to bring it down and out. So down would be just like this. I guess down would be on its original line, but we also need to bring it out in order to make it wider. I'm gonna press Z, select the point. I wanna bring it down and out. Maybe I did it a bit too much. Maybe something like this. This is where you can really have a lot of fun, right? This to me is super powerful because it's a small detail and yet it makes a world of a difference. Maybe something like this. Let's try and compare them side by side again. To me, the angle looks good. Maybe a tiny bit lower. Yeah, this is perfect. Then, even though it looks like a straight segment, so when you have a look at this, it looks like a straight line. Lapels are almost never a straight line. We actually want to add a bit of a curve here at the base. That smooths it out, and at the same time, it doesn't look curved, does it? In my eyes, it feels a bit more straight to me. I don't know why, but you always want to add a bit of curve, so there's your pro tip there. Now we want to do the collar component, and for this one, having a look at the reference, it goes super tall up the neckline. We could potentially do it out of a single component, but in this case, I'm gonna also add another component which lifts the neckline, and then I'm gonna do the collar piece on top. I'm gonna take a couple measurements. So I'm gonna press Z. I wanna select this component, hold down Shift, select this component, add them up. So 179.6. This is the value that we actually need to fill. And in order to create the shape and have it stand up, wrapping around the avatar, again, if you watch the reel, kudos, you probably know, or if you worked in the past, you definitely know. I'm gonna press S, I'm gonna create a rectangle. I'm gonna make it shorter, like this. And in order to have it pop up, we actually need it to be, this time, the opposite. We need it to be convex instead of the concave that we had here at our connection point. I'm gonna right click and do unfold symmetric editing with sewing. V, I wanna add a curve point here. I need to bring it down. There we go. Z, I'm gonna take this point, simply delete it. V, I wanna grab this one. Make sure that it has a smoother transition. And then I'm gonna press Z, take the measurement again because I forgot it. So 179.6, 179.6 divided by the half that we already have. So 527.7. 527.7 equals 34.03%. A, selected, start dragging it. 34.03%, press OK, and this is gonna match perfectly in length. In order to sew it, I'm pressing M, starting from the center back, okay? And taking it all the way to the end. Holding down Shift, starting at the center back and taking it towards the collar and towards the lapel. Awesome. Release Shift in order to lock it in place. Right click, I'm gonna do superimpose side, simulate, and press F if you find yourself lost ever. With the piece selected, here's a pro tip. You can press F in order to locate your components. I'm gonna press Ctrl H in order to strengthen it. And now I can grab this point and actually lift it up. Maybe it's a bit too high up the neckline, a bit lower. This is kind of like a bomber jacket collar. You can also apply the very same principle there. Cool, so I'm smoothing out the curve. Let's make sure that we're opening up the stress map just so we're not in the yellow or the red. Around the neck, you don't want it to be too tight. Okay, and you probably noticed that this is a darker orange. Well, this happened because when I've sewn the component, I've sewn the right side onto the left side. All that I have to do now is to go into the 3D window, right click, flip, normal, and that's gonna flip it in the 3D window as well. It being symmetrical, you didn't see a change. And now that we have this, we can actually attach the component on top, which is gonna link up with the lapel as well. So how do we do that? Exactly the same procedure. So I'm gonna press S, I'm gonna create a square, I'm gonna press Z, grab one of the points, bring it up. I'm gonna unfold symmetric with editing, but this time, since I want it wrapping around the garment and not the avatar, we need to do the opposite. And we need to make it even more dramatic. So I'm gonna grab the collar component, I'm gonna start lifting it up quite a bit, I'm gonna do a large amount. Okay, create two curve points, bring them up as such. Maybe it's something like this. Grab this curve point here. And then I need to take a measurement of this. So 171.3, I want it to be matching the measurement here, which at the moment there is a huge difference, not a problem. Let's do exactly the same technique. 171.3 divided by 614.2 equals 27.89. Select it, scale it down, 27.89. Press enter, and there you have it. Now, let's link them up. I'm gonna press M, start from the center, take it towards the edge, center, edge. There we have it. Now I'm gonna select the color in the 3D window, right click, superimpose over. And check this out, when I press F, this is my color. It's super skinny, it doesn't make that much sense aesthetically, so we need to first of all lift it up in order to make it wider. There we go. And we have the same issue, so we can even press B, select the sewing line, do it turned, simulate again, and if it doesn't go immediately into position, you can either do it here, manually adjust it and force it back. Oh, there we go, it actually worked. Or you can always just, let me go back to it being screwed up. Or you can always just go from this, do superimpose over, and that's 100% gonna help you with your situation. But we still have to shape it because we want this point here to actually meet up around this point here onto the lapel. And we're also gonna be sewing them together, so we want to link them up. How do we do that? By grabbing the point, moving it out, so we're widening it. We need to actually extend it as such. Simulate again, let it rest, make sure that it's sitting in its natural position. I'm gonna press Ctrl H, right click, and I'm gonna flip the normal so we get the orange color, which makes it a bit more intuitive to actually, you know, see and adjust. Then I wanna grab this point, I need to extend it out further. We want them to be almost equal. Maybe it's something like this. And now we can actually do it a bit more accurately by pressing Z, having a look at our lapel, which is currently 84.2. We need to make this one the same. So I'm gonna zoom in, 84 point, I can't see, I don't know why this is happening, whatever. Let's extend it out by 0.2 afterwards. So now it's 84.2. I'm gonna press N and I'm gonna sew it in the 3D window here. So this is exactly like the Mugler. We still have to adjust the line here. Press V. Bring it in as such. Have a look from the front. And what that achieved is it added a bit too much roundness around this area. I want to remove the roundness. I want it round around the back where it's going to look nice and neat. But towards the front, I want it to have a bit more of an edge. So maybe something like this. There you go. There you go. Boom. Beautiful. And I guess this is as good of a time as ever to tell you about the method of doing the collar just that tiny bit better. But it is a lot more difficult to actually sew and assemble yourself. You might want to stay away from it, but I feel like a few of you are actually going to be dead set on getting this piece properly done. For the sake of simplicity, I split the collar into two separate components, but I'm now going to select both and I am going to delete them. They're not the traditional method. They're never going to look as clean as the method that I want to show you here. And it relies most on the turn of cloth, the one that I mentioned in the previous chapters, where you actually never want to see the edge of your fabric. And the very first area where this is visible is here at the lapel. I'm going to press B, I'm going to select this line and I want to merge the two components together. Then I want to select the trace tool. I'm going to select this baseline and press enter in order to transform it into an internal line. Z, select the internal line. I'm going to grab the fold strength. I'm going to get it all the way to 100. And the fold angle, I think I need 360. And I want to turn on fold rendering. Let's simulate now. And yeah, it seems like I did need 360. Gonna select both components, strengthen them at the front. Perfect. So this is where we were at previously. But here's the deal. The lapel, you don't actually want it to fold right up against this edge. You want it to actually fold a bit closer towards the neckline. I'm gonna press Z and I want to select the internal line and I'm gonna shift it around 14 mil from the edge. There we go. Now when I simulate, you're going to see the effect that that has. It grabs the lapel and it makes it actually hug the body just that tiny bit tighter. But at the same time, it makes the lapel smaller. So we need to compensate. I'm going to select this dot here. I'm going to bring it towards the left. And I'm going to add 14 mil. What we lost, we are now gaining back. Perfect. Let's wait for the simulation to do its thing. Now I can actually see it being a lot more snug next to the body. And we want the collar to replicate exactly the same feature. This one I feel like maybe I need to raise just that tiny bit higher up the neckline because we're not going to have as much control as we did with the two components. You're going to see why. This one I might raise maybe around 16 mil. Let's make sure that it's following the 180-degree rule. By positioning the components one next to another, rotating them, making sure that they're connected properly. Maybe it's something like this. And as you can see, this is not currently following the 180 rule. So I'm going to press V, lift it up, and now it actually seems about right. I'm going to shift it back. Z, take the measurement between the two, and we need 172.2. I'm gonna press S and I'm gonna create a rectangle, 172.2, and height-wise, I'm just gonna do 50 and alter it from there. I'm gonna press Z, unfold symmetric with editing, and now we actually need to make it a tiny bit concave, but not too much. We're not going drastic with this one. Let's try maybe 8 mil. Let's try 10 in total, so I'm doing 2 extra. There we go. Then I'm gonna press V, add a bit of a curve. Lift it up, so we're following the 180 rule, at least here at the base to begin with. And now we changed the final dimensions, so it should be 172.2. Let's open up the calculator and adjust for it. 172.2 divided by the value that we currently have. 172.6. Yeah, I'm that big of a perfectionist, so I'm doing 99.76%. 0.76. Perfect. So, the tiniest modification. Now, I'm gonna sew it onto the blazer by pressing M. I'm sewing the center back of the collar. And then I need to actually connect it here, so I'm holding down Shift. Start center back and then take it towards the front. Yours are going to be arranged a lot better than mine. but that's fine. I'm gonna grab it and I wanna do superimpose over in the 3D window. Simulate. Let's see what it does, right? It's gonna have a tendency to actually lift up, and it's just the nature of the game. If you only have this subtle of a curve, it's 100% of the time naturally gonna wanna fold up. But we're gonna be using the canvassing method in order to help it fold back down. Now, before we do that, let's try and figure out how much bigger we wanna make it. I'm gonna maybe add 20 mil. Simulate again. I want to grab the color and I want to make sure that the particle distance is smaller, so we have a bit more detail in our simulation. I made it 5 instead of 20, which it defaults to when you're creating new components. Now I'm simulating again. That's actually starting to look quite good. It's decent enough. Let's try and get the angle right. So we actually need to grab this side of it and we need to extend it down by a large distance. So Z, let's try maybe this much. Oh, that actually seems quite good. Let's simulate. Make sure that it's resting naturally in that position. Okay, maybe I need to bring it back just a bit. Something like this. Let's have a look. I'm gonna press Z. I wanna make sure that my measurement from the collar actually matches the one on the lapel where we're gonna be connecting it. I'm gonna do Z and tuck it in by 1.8. And then I'm gonna press X and I wanna introduce a segment point here for 14, which matches the segment that we have here. Remember, we did it at 14. Awesome. Then I'm gonna introduce an internal line by pressing G, connecting this point, taking it towards the middle of the collar, but we're gonna go below the half point, maybe 2/5 of the way down, something like that. Then I'm gonna press V, curve it so we're following the 180-degree rule, Z, and I now wanna select this internal line, increase the fold strength, and then I want to grab the angle, I think 0 on this one. Let's try it. Simulate, see what happens. Yeah, there we go, there we go, there we go. It actually worked beautifully in our favor. We can have a look here, see if it's getting raised up the neckline enough, and I feel like it's not. So I'm gonna select the internal line. Maybe lift it up by an extra 12 mil, 1.2 centimeters, V. Smooth out the curve. There we go, simulate. And this is gonna raise it higher up the neckline. Awesome. But then of course we actually need to increase the overall width of the collar. So we have it, you know, resting down the neck. You want it to actually fold down and look flush. Maybe it's something like this. There we go. Now I'm simulating and it actually starts to look incredible. This point, I need to tuck it back down. So we want to save the 84.2. This is going to be a bit difficult, but I'm going to start here. Let's bring it back by 8 mil. We're going to have to straighten out the line afterwards, but it's fine, not the end of the world. Maybe a bit further back. Let's try extra 5. There we go. So now it's going into its natural resting position. I want to grab this point. I'm going to try and keep it at 14, at least on the bottom side, while straightening the line. I'm introducing a segment point here, so I have a better look at the measurement. Z, and this one should be 84.2. Cool. I'm going to grab it and just manually extend it out. 84.2. There we go. I need to straighten out this line a tiny bit more. So it's following the same 180 rule. You want it to, you know, flow smoothly between the sides. And I might even tuck it in here so we get the geometric shape that we had with the two-piece collar. There we go. Let's now sew it onto the lapel, which is what we're gonna do in the real world as well. Simulate. What else should we address? Let's do the quick flap that we have here. Initially, I thought that it was like a pocket welt, like a typical pocket welt, but you're gonna find the engineering behind this component so much more interesting because it's actually kind of mind-blowing, the lengths that designers go to in order to make their
piece is interesting. And this one was kind of eye-opening. We managed to get it done properly, but it was not an easy feat. So let's just do it first as a 3D component. And if you care, you can get it from the Masterclass when you do decide to make this piece in the real world. In order to add a rectangle, you want to hold down the left click here, and we are looking for the internal rectangle tool, which you're not using most of the time, so it doesn't have a shortcut. It's not one of the more useful tools, but in this case, why not? I'm gonna press OK. Stick with the standard and then reshape. Then I'm gonna press Z. We need the line here at the base to be exactly where the tip of our dart is. Let's bring this one down. Something like this, cool. Now I want to grab the opposite side, and then I kind of need to shift it up. In order to select the entire feature, you need to double click on the internal line, and that's going to select the entirety of the rectangle. I want to move it down, okay? Double click, select it again, and we just need to eyeball it. This is this is part of the fun, right? Let's try and move it more towards the right, maybe something like this. Okay, yeah. The thing is, maybe it's not leading perfectly like our reference, because here you can see it's still on the sleeve component, and in our situation, it's heading towards this line. So again, if you want to get it perfect, go ahead, do the adjustments again. If I wanted to achieve this for the tutorial, I'd have to do so many more iterations, and you would not find it helpful at all. But I'm just gonna stick to this, and instead of going all the way up here, I'm gonna have it up against this edge. I think that translates quite well. So I'm gonna select this point, and I want to kind of make it parallel to this line here. I'm gonna select this one, bring it in, and I'm gonna leave it as such. If you just want to turn it into a pattern piece and actually attach it, you can double click, right click, and you want to do clone as pattern. And in order to sew it, I'm just gonna do N. I'm gonna sew it at the top and at the base. Very quickly, and then superimpose over. There you go. So now you have like a 3D flap as reference in the piece as well. So it's not just fictitiously here as a reference line. Let's now do the sleeves, and yeah, I'm gonna call it a day. This is gonna be it for the design stage. So how exactly am I gonna do the sleeves? Again, we have a few reels on the topic of sleeves, but it's actually a lot more complicated. Let's just try to do it here and understand it together. I'm gonna press S, make a rectangle, cool. There's your sleeve, boom. Tutorial done, thank you for watching. Just kidding. I'm gonna press N, I wanna sew it on the side. Select it with A, Control H. If I were to simulate it now, this would happen. A complete mess, an aberration, Control Z. I want to place it onto the body, and the quickest way to do it inside a CLO is to do it through this. So show arrangement points. Select the sleeve, and you want to click it on one of the dots here, which coincides with where the sleeve is going to be positioned, right? Simulate. I want to make sure that you actually understand the geometry behind the sleeve, and I think the best way to do it and visualize it, if you're a beginner, is to actually go here, hold down the left click, and go for fitting accurate fabric. And then you're gonna see here in the property editor, the gravity option, which I want to turn down to 0. So gravity is minus 9.8 meters per second squared, I believe, is the value of G. And instead we wanna just make it 0. So we're kind of like in space, not on the moon specifically. That one still has gravity, is just lower. There we have it. And now wherever I position it, if I stop it, it's actually gonna float in space. And I think this is like a brilliant way of visualizing the entire design, because you're gonna see exactly how a sleeve is constructed. I wanna go into the avatar folder, female V2, pose, and instead of having the avatar with the arms further away from the body, I wanna move them next to the body. So I'm gonna go for this pose here. Wait for it to do its thing as it's running through the simulation. Then I want to start the simulation again. And what do you think happens if I were to just connect this plain rectangle onto my garment? Would this work? No, it wouldn't. And here's why. This component, so this area, say it gets connected here. What is this gonna do?
is gonna grab the shoulder, pull it down. And at the same time, the shoulder is gonna kind of lift the sleeve up. It works against our design. What we want to achieve instead is a piece that starts here and it naturally goes up. So even when it's not connected with zero gravity here inside a CLO, it should be tighter around the shape that the body already is. So it's not actually pulling onto it. So let's do our very first alteration and see if that gets us closer to the result. I'm gonna press V. I'm gonna make a curve point right down the middle and I'm gonna lift it up. There we go. Now when I simulate, you're gonna notice that the gap that we had before is smaller. Is it not? It's actually following the shape. And we could potentially even sew this together. But there is another problem that's gonna pop up. Here, you're gonna see that this one is much wider than the body. So again, the sleeve is gonna have a tendency to do this and to do this, while the body is gonna do this to the sleeve. Not ideal. We wanna make sure that we have it closer to the final shape, even in this stage where the gravity is not functional. Maybe we need to narrow down the tip so it's as narrow as we have it here onto the body. How? Well, V at another point. What if we did this? Bringing it in, the sides, right? Let's tuck them in. So the tip of my sleeve is actually a lot narrower compared to what we had before. Now it really seems like we're getting so much closer to what we're after. The sleeve is still massive, so we need to scale it down, and I'm gonna do that just so this visual example makes a bit more sense to you. I'm gonna press B. I wanna make sure that I have a point here, a segment point, because the sleeve is gonna connect from here to here, and from here to here, right? And we currently, if I press Z, we currently don't have a segment point, which can be a huge issue. Press B, right click, add point to pattern on end. Amazing. And now we can actually measure all of those components at the same time by holding down Shift. We're gonna open up the calculator and do exactly the same technique as we did for every matching that we've done so far. So 473.9, the value that we want the sleeve to become, 473.9 divided by the value that it currently is, 645.4 equals 73.42%. So I'm gonna select the sleeve, I'm gonna start bringing it in, 73.42%. Press enter and you're gonna notice just how much smaller it is going to be now. I wanna move it in position, simulate, and try to move it as it was before. And now you're gonna notice that the width of my component here is so much closer than what I had before. Is it not? Than what we started with. Check it. Even if I move it up as such, it kind of starts to look right, does it not? And now I'm gonna point to you so you have just that bit more precision when you're doing this kind of design to what exactly you want to look for. You want a bit of rounding at the top because you don't want it super pointy. Instead, I'm gonna add a few points here at the tip so we're rounding it out. But starting from this point here, towards the front, and this is the front of my sleeve, we have a very straight feature. It's not for the entirety of the segment because the armpit hole should stop here and it should coincide with this area here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start flattening it out as such, okay? And then I'm gonna move the sleeve away so we have a look at the simulation again. You're gonna notice that the back is a bit more open compared to the front. And we need to replicate that feature with our sleeve. So in order to do that, I'm gonna select those curve points, move them towards the left. I wanna take this one, tuck it in just a tiny bit more. And at the back, let's try and compare the feature. Again, we need it to go straight down. So maybe to something like this. Cool. There you can see it transitioning and it's quite straight. And from that point, it goes here. So we kind of want to have a very similar curve on the opposite side. So maybe something like this. This one. Bring it out a bit. Temporarily, I think this is actually going to work quite well. Let's move it in place. Simulate it again without gravity. And let's see how close we actually got the shape to the final product. So before we attach it, we want to just make sure that it actually looks right. I feel like we have a bit of a gap to fill here. So I'm going to press V, bring this one up. There you go. Now it's actually a bit better. And at the back, I don't know, 100% happy, I feel. Yeah. No, at the back we kind of nailed it. At the front there was a small modification to make, but this should be the final shape of our sleeve. So let's rematch it, because at the moment we kind of changed the value. Whenever you do a small modification, there is a butterfly effect. So I'm gonna press Z, select the components, and I wanna again do the same matching technique. 473.9 divided by 477.7, 477.7 equals 99.20%. Select it, 99.20. There we have it, and now it's actually perfectly matched. And let's sew it onto the body. Let's see what that looks like once we finally connect all those pieces together. I'm gonna start here at the tip, and I'm gonna take it all the way down, and I'm gonna hold down Shift, start at the tip, so at the tip of our shoulder. Hold down Shift, keep holding it down, and it goes roughly to the armpit hole. So we're kind of on the right track here. We might have to do a small modification, we're gonna see. Then I want to start at the tip for the back. Then I'm holding down Shift, keep holding it down, connecting it all the way. So from the tip towards the armpit hole. And when this shit happens, you might want to feel like, oh my God, I'm going to give up on CLO. Go fuck yourself, CLO. What is happening here? Let's do it again. Sometimes instead of choosing the shortest path, it goes for the longest one, which makes no sense, but whatever. Start at the tip, take it towards the armpit hole, hold down Shift, start at the tip of the shoulder, keep going, and we want to end here. Now let's simulate, and boom. We actually have a sleeve that perfectly fits our design. We still have to do a few alterations, but there is a problem with clothes. So when you're doing super tight fitting clothes or interesting shapes, you're gonna notice that at the armpit, you're always gonna have goddamn issues. And the problem is that the avatar is not soft. It doesn't have a soft body like a real person would. So once you are connecting the arm next to the body, the garment, the fabric itself needs to escape that area as opposed to just sit there, which is what happens in reality. So I'm gonna go for another pose here just so we can better see our design. There we have it. Now you're gonna notice that, yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense, and it even has a tendency to head straight down, which is ideal because you're gonna be spending most of the time actually wearing the garment, you know, with the arms next to the body. So this is actually gonna do the trick. Let's go back onto the simulation settings, and I'm gonna do it normal default, so the garment is actually falling because it was still in 0 gravity. And there we have it. We still have a few modifications to make. So for instance, I'm not happy with the fact that the sleeve is so goddamn massive here at the base. I'm gonna press Z, tuck it in, right click, let's try and do it equally from both sides. So I'm doing 5 centimeters, quite a large amount. I'm just tapering it in. Simulate. Okay, this looks a lot better, actually. Cool, and now let's press Z, select this segment point, move it down. And I'm gonna do it by, let's try 60 mil. The sleeve is quite big. Even in the showcase here, it is massive, right? It's long, it's wide, it's quite large. And I think that the shape that we have here perfectly reflects it. Even the length, I need to extend it further. I'm gonna add an extra 25 mil. Maybe it's something like this. If you pay super close attention, you're gonna notice that this intersection here, the one that coincides with this line here, is actually another cut that we need to add. In order to do it, I'm gonna press B. I wanna select the sewing line, and I wanna start my line from here, take it down, right? But where does the line start? Easy. B, right click, add a pointer pattern on start. G, in order to access the internal line tool, and I'm just gonna bring it parallel to this edge, and then I can adjust it if I want it slightly going in, maybe something like this. Right click, I'm gonna do cut and sew. And that just adds a seam line down the middle. It also unstrengthens it, so I'm gonna select it, Control H in order to strengthen it. Now let's do exactly the same thing for the back. Again, I can't tell if this is the case or not, but I'm just doing an educated guess at this point. So I'm gonna add a point on start, G, and we want to add an internal line here, right click, cut and sew. Awesome. So we also have a similar line at the back as we have here at the front. But there's still some more things that we want to do. We're not done. Your arms fold, and the way that they fold should also be reflected in the shape of the sleeve. So our arm doesn't just go perfectly straight out. It goes slightly out towards the elbow and then it goes in. And this is how you walk, this is how you move forward. And in order to achieve that very same effect, you want to select this component here at the back. You want to shift the segment at the base towards the right. And I'm gonna do it by 40 mil. We're kind of creating a very similar arced effect as we had here at the skirt. And then I want to grab the other one and I'm gonna move it opposite to what we did here. So an extra 50. If I simulate, we still don't have a curve, but this is more naturally following the shape of the body. And now we just want to press V and add that bit of a curve, which points towards the elbow. So 5, 4, 1, let's try and make this one the same. We might have to go a bit too further out. I'm not gonna do it all the way. Press B, select them, and this one needs to be extended out by 3.6 just so it matches in length. 3.6, there we have it. And now when I simulate, you're gonna notice that my sleeve actually has a bit of a curve. This is a lot more important in other designs that don't have super oversized sleeves. So if it's tighter around the body, this step is 100% crucial, you cannot skip it. Here, maybe you can argue that it's not as important since we don't get to see the sleeve tightly around the body. So we never really know what its actual shape is. Next up, let's do the front segment here. And for this one, I just want to curve it in a bit. I want to grab this one, curve it out a bit, and then I'm gonna tuck it back in. Cool. Press B, make sure that they're the same length. If the error is smaller than 1 millimeter, you can in theory ignore it, but I cannot ignore such a thing. So I'm gonna extend this one out by 0.7. Grab the segment point, 0.7. I'm just obsessive in that way. Cool. And now let's make sure that those match, which they don't. What's the difference? 2.7. So we need to actually extend this one out by 2.7. Grab the point, do it manually along the original line. And this is gonna be the sleeve. How do we copy it on the opposite side is the question, the $1,000,000 question. Say it with me. Control D. Take it over to the opposite side. There you have it. The Mugler. In the next episode, which is part of the masterclass, we're gonna actually start preparing those patterns for printing. We're gonna head over to the atelier and we're gonna show you how to make the garment yourself. Again, if you wanna learn, if you actually feel like you have a future in fashion design, go get it. It's gonna help you actually, you know, fill in the voids that CLO3D has created. Because many people are designing and they don't know if the clothes are gonna fit and they don't look right and then they just give up or think of it as a useless tool. But we found ways to actually make it work in the real world. And I think that is actually quite powerful for a lot of people. In the final episode, we're gonna do the photorealistic render and try and recreate the look that Mugler had a few years ago. The one that went viral, the one that brought you here in the first place.
Todo el mundo quisiera ser feliz, al menos una vez.